Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto soul sent back in time travel part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. His body was aching. That was his first thought upon regaining consciousness. He kept his eyes closed, in a desperate hope that his body might stop hurting so much. He wasn't sure where he was hurting, it seemed to be everywhere. Despite this, he heard a harsh laughter. Harsh but amused. The one doing the laughing was clearly delighted by his predicament. He opened his eyes slowly to see grass. Thick dark strands of grass and straw. And some plant that smelled like mint. He had to be on a field then, for the grass to be so tall, he thought, and tried to look around. Nope, it was too dark to see much of anything but the grass right in front of him. Naruto painfully pushed himself up with his arms, small arms, he noted dizzily, and looked around again. He was in a clearing in a forest. Trees, not large and not small, stood around and shadowed for what little light the moon supplied. A red forest fox stared back at him from the base of one tree, and Naruto had seen the smirk on its face before. If that wasn't enough to convince him what that creature was, the malicious red eyes were. "Kyubi, what are you doing out?" he asked, and surprising himself in being too tired to be scared. He felt drained in a way he had never before experienced. He felt as if every ounce of chakra he had was emptied, his energy depleted. Put shortly, he was utterly exhausted to the point where he knew he didn't have anything left to fight with. He would accept whatever happened. The fox snorted from his place at the base of the tree, and its one tail wrapped itself around his front paws. Naruto blinked. He had never seen the fox with only one tail, and it was so small. "Oh, I don't know, saving your sorry life, and more importantly mine?" Kyubi asked rhetorically and sniffed indignantly. "In doing so I am reduced to this poor excuse of existence, a one-tailed fox kit. A kit with centuries worth of memories, but nothing to back it up with. You, pathetic human as you may be, are luckier. Humans grow into what they consider power far quicker." Naruto blinked, pretending not to hear the wielded insult thrown at him. The Kyubi no Kitsune reduced to a kit, and from what he said he looked over himself for the first time. Small arms, small legs, small body. Baby fat on his feet and hands, chubby knees. He was a freaking child. A young one at that, perhaps 5 or so years. "Kyubi, what did you do?" he asked with dread. All of a sudden he felt cold, like all the warmth his body previously held was sucked out of him. Even the ache dulled. The fox scoffed. "What did I do? What did I do? I wonder if you can understand even if I explain. Do you know what I am, little human?" Naruto looked at him warily. Was the creature really going to explain to him, and not just mock him like it usually did? "You are the Kyubi no Kitsune, the demon fox," he said slowly, not understanding why the fox asked. It didn't need to hear it to inflame its ego. Again, an aggravated sigh escaped the fox. Yes, that is my titles. At least it was, until I had to save us. So many years of gaining power, all lost thanks to you and your inaptitude. Useless humans. What I am, however, is one of the locus points of the word. I get chakra from the word. Do you understand? I slowly gather chakra that is freed when people die, so whatever you do you can't get rid of me. Well, you actually, through sheer incompetence, almost managed. It will take years, perhaps hundreds of them, before I am back to where I should be, as one of the strongest beings in existence. All because of you, he snarled, showing white fangs that gleamed in the weak moonlight. Naruto didn't dare say anything. Though small, and according to itself, weak, he had a feeling the little demon kit was far from as harmless as it said it was. The fox seemed to collect itself and calm down, as calm as a creature of violence could be in any case. "While we were being killed thanks to you, I did something meaningful and something I didn't know I could. Perhaps I could only because I was sealed within a body of flesh and blood." Naruto kept his silence, staring at the fox as he remembered the horrific battles, the fear and anger he felt when he returned to find Konoha in shambles, the many lacking chakra signatures, feeling Tsunade Bachan's chakra flicker out of existence while he fought, and then the story Pain told him war with the Root and Danzu, and the crazy members of Akatsuki. Honestly, their members were all lunatics and freaks of nature one way or another. That and those eyes. He had once thought he hated the cold eyes of those ignoring him and refusing to acknowledge him, but the Mangekyo Sharingan eyes were worse. They were a symbol of everything he disliked, down to the betrayal of what should be the persons closest to you. It was the last he remembered before everything went black, those red and black eyes burning with unholy glee. He felt relieved somehow. If the fox had managed to escape them, then the world was safe from the crazy plan Pain had come up with to create peace. Not to mention whatever the mask-wearing Uchiha wanted. He had never before imagined that he'd feel grateful to the fox, even if the bastard had turned him into a brat. The fox regarded him, and continued speaking upon seeing that Naruto accepted that he had done something, and this wasn't some trick on his part. Good, it would make all so much easier. Thanks to my chakra being that of dead people, I basically returned us to a different timeline. Or, it will be different thanks to us being here. Every life, in whatever form, is decided by the choices we make. This timeline will be different because I, through your blood and the connection through the seal, managed to return your soul and due to the seal mine, into a time upon the choice of your father brought him close to death. He only survived that time because he was left alone. With us arriving, his weakened soul departed and left the body for you to inhabit. A body without a seal, I might add, so I am free to go. Naruto felt sick. His father, he was in his father's body. In the past, which meant that somehow, the fox had been able to use the chakra of dead people to return to when that chakra started to pass into the natural flow. It was scary. His head was already aching, so he couldn't get a second headache, but now it felt as if it wasn't going to go away. Past who was his father anyway? The fox continued to look at him with amusement as he saw panic, fear, confusion and revulsion pass over the human's face. It settled on confusion. Your name from now on will be Namikaze Minato, the man who sealed me and the Yondaime Hokage, at least in the timeline you know. He married Uzumaki Kushina, your mother, or the mother of that body, more accurately, was named Namikaze Harai. She was killed tonight during a mist raid. Minato ran away into the forest. You have never known your father. Your mother was a seamstress, and did prostitution on the side to earn enough money to raise her son. That is all I could gain from the memories left in the chakra. What you do from now on is up to you, though I should tell you, this time will be different from the one you knew. I am no longer the all-powerful Kyuubi no Kitsune I should be. I am a kit. The disdainful growl escaping the fox belied his dissatisfaction with the situation. The Akatsuki will have to come up with something else to screw the world over with. That suits me just fine. I don't take kindly to humans trying to enslave me. There might be wars, there might not, I don't know. I don't care. This is where we part, and do pray this is the last we will ever see of each other. It was the longest speech Naruto had ever heard from the fox, and was surprised that it sounded so normal. He wasn't screaming profanities, wasn't cursing his name or growling and sneering, he was stating facts. The fox rose to leave when Naruto remembered something else. He had to cling to some facts, since most of what he heard made his mind reel. He really didn't want to deal with it. Wait. You said our souls were interwoven, how is it now? He asked. He wasn't sure how he thought of asking that, or why he remembered that it might be important, but he was sure he wanted to know. The fox smirked. Looks like you gained a brain along the way. Good for you. As for your question, our souls are no longer a problem. It was the seal that kept our souls together, and since we are in a time before the necessary sacrifice to power the seal is made, the seal stopped existing when we passed its point of creation. Does that explain it? Naruto didn't feel like it did, but from the glint in the red eyes he presumed it was better to nod and pretend than to ask any more. With that, the great demon Lord Kyuubi no Kitsune, henceforth reduced to a one-tailed demon kit, trotted off into the forest and left one Uzumaki Naruto, now turned Namikaze Minato, to stare after him, and for the first time in his life, he was truly and utterly alone. In the body of his father. In a time he only knew some about from boring lessons back at the academy. Before a war that changed the map drastically, from what he had heard. Brilliant. He just now realized he had no idea where he was. Bugger it all, the night had been cold. Naruto had huddled himself up against a tree. He wrapped his arms around his legs and pulled them to his chest to keep warm, but it was still cold. His small and young body was not used to the conditions he had endured as an adult, and he didn't have the Kyuubi inside him anymore. The beast had at least made sure he never came dangerously close to overheating or freezing. Sometime during the night, he had fallen asleep with his head on his knees, too exhausted both physically and mentally to keep awake. When the sun finally came up and woke him, the grass and his clothes were moist from the dew, and a thin fog hovered over the ground. It gave the forest he was currently in an airy appearance, as if there were more things in there than what was usual for a forest. With the demon fox loose, who knew if that might be correct or not? Naruto had never given it a thought, but he wondered where a large demon would live when it wasn't sealed up in a human being. Especially one with the size of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. He sat under the tree for the longest time, until the mist had evaporated and the dew had dried from the grass. He ignored the sounds from his stomach, and how weak and vulnerable he felt as a child. Not to mention the complete apathy he felt. He was at a loss as to what to do, what to feel, and just about everything else. He was in a different time with no idea where he was. For all he knew, all the people he knew were dead, or didn't know him, and he was alone. He had cried when he woke up, a lot, but he didn't have tears left anymore, so he just sat there, listening to the few birds around and the sound of the naked branches moving against each other in the breeze. It had taken him the grand total of the entire morning to realize this, and what it meant. Wintertime was not the best time to be a lost child out in the open. His clothes measured up to brown pants, sandals, a white shirt and a dark brown jacket with a small crest on it. He had taken to run his fingers over it, and noted the fine lines running like waves over it. It was a nervous reaction. He knew that much about psychology, but he couldn't help it. If he hadn't been so hungry, he was sure his stomach would have been a knot of nerves and butterflies. He didn't count his undergarments, since they didn't exactly shield him from the cold, but they were there. He was strangely happy about that, but figured it was his brain's way to tell him not everything was as bad as it could have been. Right. With that in mind, he rose and started to walk slowly through the forest. He had no idea where he was or where he was going, but if he kept going he had to come somewhere. He breathed smelled of salt, so if he kept going in that direction, he was pretty sure he'd reach the sea. From there, well, he would have to find a way to Konoha. He wanted to be a ninja, and he didn't want to serve any other village. It was bad enough that he had to be another person, and get to know the world and people all over again. He knew he couldn't lie about his loyalties to. He could tell only from walking that this body was different, not just because it was small and young. He knew he wouldn't grow up to be short and stocky this time. This body would be leaner, more acrobatic and faster. Not all power and strength. He would have to come up with a whole new fighting style. How troublesome, to quote a friend he had most likely lost forever. He let out a sigh as his stomach grumbled again, making him jump at the loud sound in the otherwise silent forest. He looked around. He was almost expecting someone to attack him from behind, or above, or even below, but there were no movements, no sounds and no smells to alert him. Not that he knew if he could still sense that sort of thing in this untrained body. He would have to try. It was at least something to focus on, until he found out where he was and if it was possible to get to Konoha from there. Concentrating, he tried to call on his chakra, which left him woefully disappointed when nothing happened. This body had clearly not used chakra before, and it was clear to him that he would have to go through the whole meditation and unlocking the chakra thing again. It also meant he wasn't able to sense chakra anymore, something that disturbed him greatly. After living in a civil war for 3 years, sensing chakra had become second nature to him, and anyone else still alive. Root weren't known for being lenient after all. Kill first and ask questions later were their motto. It had forced them to do the same, to kill without hesitation or regards, and he hated it. He really did. He sat down Indian style and closed his eyes, focusing on the energy within him. It wasn't as difficult as it had been the first time around, probably because he had done it once before, at least in his memories he had, and his reserves were smaller. He snorted and broke the meditation. Right, of course his reserves were smaller. He was a 5-year-old child with no demons sealed in him. Though, he thought ruefully, chakra control should be easier this time around, especially since it felt as if the chakra flew smoother in this body than in his last. God, that sounded creepy. Almost like Orochimaru. That freak was alive now too. He shuddered and rose to walk again. It wouldn't do to remain in one place for too long if the mist ninja were still wreaking havoc in the area. He'd rather not be captured by slave traders either. That was something he had heard from Jiraiya during their training trip. He had told him about the wars in the past, and how some sold orphans as slaves. After the Third Ninja War, the daimyo had forbidden it in the Fire Country, but it still happened other places. At the time it had made him angry, and he had raged at how unfair it was that some people took advantage of the poor and the defenseless. Jiraiya had been silent, a distant look in his eyes, and he hadn't said more about it than that. Naruto had had the feeling that he hadn't wanted to talk about it in the first place. After the Civil War he understood his reasoning. He didn't want to remember things he had done and seen during that time either. He had to have a few more meditating sessions before he unlocked the chakra completely, but he could already feel it, and that was enough for now. It made him feel a little more secure. He knew how to let chakra flow to his limbs to get faster and stronger if he needed, or to his ears to hear better if he thought it would be necessary. It was his security blanket. It was the only familiar thing he had left, considering his abrupt leave to the past. He sighed. Without a demon in his body, he could hope this life would be more normal. At least as normal as a ninja's life could get, though from what he had heard about Namikaze Minato and the history he knew, that man had hardly lived a normal ninja life either. He was the first to ever receive flee on-sight orders. Naruto halted in his steps and slowed to a stop. It was real. This life, this situation, was real. For all it mattered, he was Namikaze Minato. That was a terrifying thought. The man had been a legend, a war hero and a beloved leader. The strongest Hokage was what they had heard in the academy. The man who stopped the Kyuubi single-handed. He had saved Konoha that day, at the cost of his own life. Could he live up to that? Naruto didn't know, and it scared him. He didn't want to not live up to it. If it wasn't because of him, Minato would have lived after all. He would have done all those things, and he would have succeeded. History had showed that. Naruto knew that no one else but the Kyuubi knew that, but he still felt as if he had stolen a great person from the world. He looked up at the gray sky and bit his lower lip, thinking. He wanted to live up to the name he knew from history, the man who had been his father, according to the Kyuubi. He would do his best for now, and when time came he would know if he had succeeded as well. That resolved, he continued to follow the smell of the sea, and wondered just how far little Minato had run the previous day. He didn't know from which direction either, but that didn't matter. He had woken up in the middle of nowhere anyway. He could, come think of it, look at the stars. He was pretty good at that. You didn't try to keep a bundle of friends and comrades safe in the wide forests of Fire Country for 3 years without learning something about navigation. Just like it didn't happen without growing up. He winced at that. He would probably be the most grown-up 5-year-old in the history of mankind. He decided to blame it on witnessing the murders of his parents. Sasuke had gotten away with being rather broody and antisocial because of that, so why not being too mature for your age? Yes, sounded about as retarded as he thought it would. Traumatized would be more like it. Though, he had seen enough to be traumatized twice over, and still wasn't. Ninja training did that to you. Not to mention having a bunch of mutated, he was sure Akatsuki members were mutated, one way or another, stalkers trying to suck a demon from your body. Perhaps he was traumatized and didn't notice gods only knew what a sane person was supposed to think. Someone like him was definitely not the right person to ask that. While he mused over his mental state, or lack thereof, he had reached the edge of the forest. What he saw didn't really lift his spirits any. He saw the sea. Okay, there was a beach and a rundown old cottage, and an equally rundown, moldy and makeshift harbor, but it didn't give him any hopes of finding out where he was, when he was, and more importantly, how he could get to Konoha from here. He chose that moment to start swearing. He felt he had earned the right. While experiencing the most exasperating time of his life due to the lack of information of any kind, he had, for the most part, accepted that he was stranded where he was. The old cottage wasn't that moldy. It did provide a shelter, and he had no use for the harbor, so he didn't care if it was about to fall apart. He had gathered dead branches from the forest floor to create a fire in the old fireplace, which had taken most of his depleted energy the first day and night, and later used the materials left in the cottage to set traps in the forest. He was by no means an expert on hunting, or picking herbs and wild vegetables for that matter, but he had lived in the forest for 3 years. Granted, he had had friends around to help him, but still. He had picked up some things. Like the most used herbs for medicine and food. He had helped Hinata and Shino pick them several times. It was often them who did it, or Chuji, but the latter usually hung around Shikamaru. No one blamed him. Naruto knew he would have done the same for his best friend. He shook his head to get rid of the depressing thoughts and left to inspect his small traps. He couldn't catch anything larger than rabbits, but it was fine. It was only him after all, and he was happy with what he could get. The forest around the cottage was always damp, and every morning the mist hung around the stems and kept the grass wet to mid-morning. It was frustrating for someone who tried his best to keep dry and warm. He wasn't the wisest person around. Okay, he didn't have many to compete with at the moment, but he knew a child's body would get sick if it was left wet and cold. It had become something of an obsession of his not to become ill. For the most part it was because there was no one there to make sure he survived if he did. He had, after all, a reputation to live up to. It didn't matter that only he and the fox knew about that particular bit of information. The cottage, old as it was, held nothing valuable for anyone who just happened to pass by. He had found a few small knives, which should be used on fish and not animals, but it was all he had, and enough material to create some traps. There was no personal items left, not even clothes, but a rickety closet had some woolen blankets. It wasn't bad if he curled up by the fire at night. Not that there was much more room than that. The cottage had one room, and that was that. He had spent the time surviving and getting used to the small body of a 5-year-old. It was an inconvenience. It was small. It was weak. It was untrained. It was exasperatingly easy to hurt. It was frustrating. Sheer willpower had kept him going for the first week, when all he wanted was to curl up and howl his frustrations to the depressing gray sky. The only thing he found positive was unlocking his chakra. It had been his light in the darkest moment he could remember when he managed to feel the warmth of the chakra circulate through him. He had laughed like a madman for the longest time, tears streaming down his cheeks and streaking his dusty skin. It was the only time it was a good thing no one was around, because if there was, they would surely have locked him up at the nearest asylum. He stopped briefly by a bush to pick the few berries it had left at this time of year. They were watery and didn't taste much, but he had stopped caring a long time ago. It felt as a long time ago, but it wasn't really. Only 3 short years. He tilted his head back, to look at the sky and let the sadness for once appear in his eyes and on his face. There were so many who died. They were crushed by pain, or they were killed in the Civil War. It felt so meaningless to fight your own, but for ideals to stand up for what you believed in, to protect what you cherished. He had killed Konoha ninja. He had willingly thrown his forehead protector away when the mark no longer stood for what he felt Konoha was. Was that what a missing nin felt? If so, he understood them at some level. He had come to terms with the deaths. It was the only thing to do when people die. You either get over it, stands up and walks on, or get dragged down by it, or so Ino's father said. He was supposed to know all about it too, so he trusted the man to know what he was talking about. Sometimes he wasn't so sure. Inoichi could drink himself into oblivion and would talk nonsense until he passed out. Of course it didn't help. The sting was still there. The sting of remorse, of guilt, of unanswered questions and longing. The goddamned longing for just one more minute, just one more chance to say all the things he wanted to tell them, to see them one more time and burn their image into his mind. The worst part was the last. When their picture faded from his memory, and he no longer managed to see them in detail in his mind. The shade of their hair shifted, their eyes changed, and their faces were obscured. In the end, everyone he knew from the future, all of them, they would be nothing but faded memories. Like an old black and white photograph. That was the reason he early on decided not to take that particular route of dealing with his issues. If that was the correct term. He shook his head, unsure of how long he had been standing in the forest looking up at the sky, and continued on his way. He would never get the answers he wanted, so there was no use standing still and catch a cold or something nastier. He had explored quite a bit of the forest around the cottage. It wasn't exiting in any way. It was normal. It was a forest. If he had expected something interesting, he would have been disappointed. However, since he hoped beyond hope the forest was normal, if nothing else in his life was, he was glad. There were no large and deadly animals lurking around, no sneaky ninja in the treetops, no miscellaneous demons laughing at him, and most importantly, no signs of an enemy. It was because of that the faint sound of human voices caught him so off guard. He hadn't heard anything but the birds and the small forest animals for the 2 weeks he had stayed there, and now, suddenly, he heard voices. He wasn't sure if he was more anxious or more relieved. It was unnerving to know he was afraid of other humans. He felt like the rabbits he was hunting and scoffed at himself. He was a ninja. He had survived 3 years of persecution, killing Root Anbu and dodging Akatsuki at the same time. He shouldn't be afraid, and yet, he masked his chakra. It wasn't really hard, not when he knew how to do it and had as little chakra as he did at the moment. He walked as silent as he could, crouching a little to make himself smaller out of habit, and tensed his muscles, ready to be pounced on at any time. He walked closer step by step when he didn't sense anything. The soft grass under his feet softened his steps further, and the still air prevented his scent to be carried by his movements. His heart was drumming when he got close enough to hear the voices clearly. They sounded young and slightly agitated. With nothing to lose if he didn't count his life, he carefully climbed up a tree to gaze down at a group of teens and children. There were 3 teenagers. They wore forehead protectors, but he didn't recognize the village symbol at all. That didn't disturb him though. From what he had heard, there were plenty of villages that were eradicated during the wars. They were in the middle or at the end of the second one, so chances were they were from one who was destroyed when he lived. He blinked. That sounded wrong. The children were from his age and up to 10, 11. They looked tired and frightened, and listened to the 3 teenagers argue without interest. It seemed they didn't care. He remained where he was and observed the quarrel with some amusement. It reminded him of the time Team 7 was new and they would argue of the best way of doing whatever task Kakashi, sensei assigned them. He frowned. This was different. They weren't doing some team bonding lesson, this was real life, and if they made the wrong decision, they would die. He shook his head when the group split up. Each of the teenagers took a smaller group of the children and left the clearing. One of them, a male with red hair, gazed after his 2 teammates with a defeated look to him, before he herded the children towards the tree Naruto was in. They passed right under him, but they didn't notice him. The children were too young to notice. There was a girl with auburn hair, almost the same shade as the teenager boy, another girl with sleek black hair and one with curly brown hair. They were accompanied by 2 boys, one with the red hair and one with black hair. The 2 with black hair were holding hands and were without doubt siblings, while the others blindly stumbled along the forest floor on their own. None of them could be older than 8 years of age, while the youngest girl, the curly-haired one, was probably 3 or 4 years younger than he was at the moment. The teenager, the ninja who should have noticed him, was too tired. Naruto could see it from where he sat. His clothes were ruffled and splattered with blood. His hair was matted with it, and Naruto smelled it when the teenager walked under the branch he was sitting on. Some of it was fresh, making him believe the teen had some open wounds somewhere. His skin was pale enough, and the lines marring his young face were from stress and weariness. Naruto had seen lines like that on the face of his comrades. It didn't take a genius to figure out what they were, refugees from a village under attack. He silently jumped from the tree to the next and followed them until they had nearly passed by the area he stayed in. He didn't think when he left the safety of the dense treetops to land quietly in the grass behind the small group. The ninja tensed and whirled around, one hand gripping a kunai and the other reaching out to stop the children from going anywhere. Perhaps even in a gesture to shield them. Naruto just tilted his head and looked at the forehead protector. It didn't tell him anything. He had never seen anyone with a swirl as their mark, but he assumed he had been correct in his earlier deduction. "I'm not going to harm you," Naruto said, rather affronted, but understood nonetheless. If it was something he could understand, it was the adrenaline-driven senses just after a battle. Especially when he wasn't in a safe place. The redhead relaxed just a little upon seeing a small child. He dropped the arm he was holding out in front of the children and lowered the kunai. It wasn't something an experienced ninja would do, but he supposed his young age worked in his favor. "Who are you?" the ninja asked him. He was staring at his shabby attire and dirt-smudged face. Naruto tilted his head a little. This was where he decided if he could give up what he was to chase a legend. He wasn't sure if he could do exactly the same, but he wouldn't let the original man down. He would make the name known to all, or die trying. This, he knew, was where he said goodbye to himself and let his own person die to become something else. Minato. My name is Namikaze Minato, he said, and smiled. He smiled because he could, because they were human like him, and they needed help as much as he needed it. They were like him, lost and alone. This was where he embraced his new life for real. The teenager, unaware of what passed behind the blue eyes of the small child, nodded. I am Uzumaki Kanuto, and this is my cousins, Kushina and Karo. He indicated the red-headed girl, who was looking rather perturbed about something, and the red-headed boy. The twins are Mizuyuki and Yahiro. The curly-haired girl is Kana. The children all looked around their protector at him, and he let his eyes travel over them as he heard their names. None of them was any he recognized from his time. They had probably died before he was born or old enough to remember them, or they became civilians. Where are you going? He asked tentatively. He didn't want to admit it, but at this time he would follow them even if they were heading for the most remote village they could find. He was desperate for company. Konoha, of course. It is the only place we can head. They are the only allies we have left, Kanuto said, and for a moment, he looked annoyed. Minato guessed that was the pinnacle of the debate they had had before the group split up. Do you mind if I join you? He asked and braced himself for a disappointment. It wasn't wise for any ninja to just pick up strays along the way. You never knew if they were spies or not, but the redhead looked at him and shrugged. He needn't have worried. The ninja scratched his head and muttered something about one more didn't matter. You are as much a refugee as us, I guess. The country has been absorbed by water. The daimyo made it official a week ago, but the elders refused to go down without a fight. Whirlpool is no more, for better or for worse, he said, and sounded far off and nonchalant. Minato saw through it, but didn't comment. The children behind him needed to believe the one who was left to protect them was strong enough to do it. They needed to feel at least a small amount of safety. It did, however, answer the question as to where he was and when. The land of Whirlpool had been persuaded, that was the word the history books used, to surrender to and join with Water Country at the end of the Second Great Shinobi War. They killed my mother, he said out of the blue, and the children all gave him sympathetic looks. He had to remember to play the wounded and emotionally strained child more often. It worked well with the image of someone trying his best to live up to some imaginary expectations. The children in front of him may not have his extra years to draw from, but he was sure they, at least those old enough, would try to do their best just to make their parents proud. He did, when he was young, and everyone shunned him anyway. He wasn't sure if they had seen what happened to their village, but he was sure they understood that they were orphans like him, and that created a bond between them. If you will let me, I'll come with you to Konoha, he said and nodded to himself. Finally, he was getting somewhere. Kanuto smiled tiredly. Sure, kid. What's your name again? He asked, and put away the kunai. He wouldn't need it, and a 5-year-old wasn't much of a threat anyway, even if he could hunt rabbits. Minato took a deep breath. This was it. From here on out, there was no going back. Namikaze Minato. With that, he allowed himself to be someone else. The wall of Konoha had never been as appealing as when the small group of ragged refugees reached it. It might be large, gray, and pose an intimidating barrier, but it was the goal of their journey. If Minato hadn't been so tired, he would have done a victory dance. Reputations be damned. Any thoughts of that were quickly squashed when they were promptly surrounded by a group of chunin on guard duty. Minato could see metal flash briefly in the light as they arrived, but the weapons were out of sight when the young ninja landed around them. Their leader was a slender and tall teenager with 5 jagged scars running from his left eye to the right side of his mouth. It looked almost as if someone had dragged a clawed hand over his face. Besides that, Minato noted how young they all were. The scared teenager was the oldest, but he couldn't be older than 18. His eyes were cool, however, as he took in the spiral on Kanuto's forehead protector. What brings you here? He asked and tilted his head to the left. His voice was smooth, but sounded as tired as the group felt. Some of the other chunin were squatting down to rest, and Minato wondered what was going on for a patrol to look as if they hadn't slept for a week. Kanuto gazed over the small ragtag group of children and shook his head reluctantly. We're from Whirlpool. It's been overrun by water. I was ordered by my superiors to bring these children to Konoha. His tone was clipped and worn. It wasn't surprising. He had been carrying the youngest child, Kana, most of the way and kept an eye out for the others. Minato suspected he used caffeine pills liberally. The way he said children irked him, though, but it wasn't as if he could protest. He regarded the Konoha ninja, who looked genuinely shocked at what they heard. Are you sure? I mean, you are probably sure. You look like shit, no offense, but why haven't we heard anything? One of the others asked, and the scarred teenager leading them gave the children a quick overall look and made a grimace. Probably because the next thing he did was to pick up a smelly, dirty 6-year-old Kushina and motioning for the rest to follow suit. He turned to Kanuto, who handed the small kana over when a female chunin cooed over the sleeping girl. Report to the Sandaime Hokage at the Hokage Tower. You can't miss it, it is big with fire written on it. We'll bring the children to the hospital. Minato was scoped up by a boy he vaguely recognized. He had black hair and black eyes, and it looked about as talkative as a clam. It took him a moment to realize he didn't recognize the person but the expression. The ninja had to be one of the Uchiha, and one closely related to Sasuke and Itachi, because he looked like them. He was taken back, however, when the young Uchiha smiled briefly and reassuringly. That was too foreign on the familiar facial structures to be anything close to their intent. Calm down, kid, I'm not going to eat you, he teenager said as Minato squirmed. He couldn't help but feel intimidated by the proximity to a person with the same bloodline as the masked freak. He settled unwillingly, but wiped his face clean of any and all emotions and stared blankly at the Uchiha. Minato, he said, glancing around. They were not running, but walking briskly. Perhaps the squad leader thought they would scare the children if they ran full speed to the village and the hospital. Kanuto was conversing quietly with the scarred leader. It was too quiet for anyone else to make out, but Minato could guess it was a summarized version of what had happened. What? The Uchiha asked and blinked at the blonde boy. Minato gave him a disarming smile. My name is Minato. It is nice to meet you, mister, he said politely and tried a small bow. It wasn't easy when he was being held as tightly as he was. Again he was granted the small smile, and he had to wonder what was wrong with this Uchiha. He certainly smiled more than any he had known from that clan, but then again, he had only known 3 members. 2 of them he had known as enemies, and the third had tried to kill him more than once, so he was probably biased in his opinion. It is a pleasure to meet you too, Minato. How are you feeling? The young man smiled amiably at the child, and hefted him a little so Minato could see his face better. I am fine, I think, thank you for asking, Minato said with a small frown. He felt fine. Tired and sore, but that was to be expected. He had to start training this less than useful body as soon as possible. This didn't cut it. Being 5 years old was a drag. He still felt as if he was a dwarf, and everything else was gigantic. It grated on his nerves. He teenager chuckled. I see. Well, they can tell for sure at the hospital. We have some of the best medics in Konoha. They can cure nearly anything. Minato perked up. If his current means of transport was willing to talk, he might as well try to get some information from him. Enough to cover eventually slip-ups on his part. Have you been there often? He asked innocently, and the blue eyes looked curiously into black. The Uchiha smirked. Finally an expression Minato could relate to. A couple of times. I had to stay for a month once, when my left leg got stuck in an earth jutsu. It nearly squashed my entire leg bone, he said, and Minato blinked. That sounds painful. What is an earth jutsu? The wonders of inquisitive children. No one ever suspected them to have the brains to remember and understand everything they were told, but they asked anyway, and people answered. If they could be trained, and if it wasn't totally immoral, small children would have made the perfect spies. The Uchiha Chunin raised an eyebrow at the sudden question, but put it down to the fickleness of children. It is a ninja technique where the ninja manipulates the earth element, he answered, almost perfectly from the textbook. Minato nodded in understanding and regarded the ground they were walking on for a moment, as if in thought. So you can manipulate the air and the water as well? And fire? He questioned, and the Chunin seemed to be pleased with his understanding. Yes, but there is also the lightning element. It isn't as common as the fire element in Konoha, though, but other countries have many lightning-based techniques. All the 5 elements have their weaknesses and strengths, so it is smartest to learn some of all even if it might be difficult. Can I learn how to do it? Minato continued and bit his lower lip for emphasis. The Chunin laughed heartily. If you want to be a ninja you can do it eventually, but it takes a lot of training to utilize any of the elemental techniques. Can you tell me how to be a ninja then? He asked with large, blue eyes directed at the poor Chunin. The young man looked mildly uncomfortable with the pleading look. I don't think so, but you could attend the Ninja Academy, and when you graduate you may become a ninja of Konoha. Why would you want to become a ninja anyway? It is dangerous and not nice at all, he trailed off, and Minato had a distinct feeling that the Uchiha spoke from the heart this time. He was a bit touched that the unknown Uchiha felt somewhat protective of him even if they barely had met. Perhaps it was because he was a small child who looked too innocent for his own good. I want to have new friends, and I don't want them to die like mama. If I learn to be a ninja, then I can look after them so they don't get killed, right? Again, the Chunin looked taken back, but he nodded all the same with a sad smile. I am sorry to hear about your mother. There are a lot of children in Konoha too who have lost their parents in the war, so you might some friends who will understand how it is. Even so, you seem older than you look. How old are you? Minato smiled to cover up the dread he felt. 5, but I am a big boy. I can read and do math, and mama said I am really good at it. The Uchiha simply gave a solemn nod, and hid his amused smile. Minato put his easy acceptance down to the fact that he came from a clan who produced amazing child prodigies at random intervals. If the Uchiha clan could do it, why shouldn't others be able to do it as well? It was something they had spent hours pondering over in the future, but eventually Shikamaru had come up with a possible solution. Some of it was thanks to their eyes. To copy techniques with a glance was useful no matter how irritating it was to anyone else. Some, he suspected, was breeding. They bred ninja like the Inuzukas bred their dogs and trained their offspring from an early age. It was in their blood, so to speak, and meaning more than their special eyes. The last, and the part that had them howling with laughter, was the theory of the one-tracked mind. Sakura had theorized that their mind was too one-tracked to focus on more than one goal at the time, resulting in them spending all their time reaching for that one goal. It led them to wonder if they could cure the Uchiha's with confusion. Shikamaru said it was a bad idea. Their brain might suffer from a complete meltdown as a consequence. Minato didn't ask more about the ninjas after that. He looked around them at the life in Konoha during the Second Great Ninja War. There were a lot more ninjas outside. He could see the black shadows of the ANB leaping over their heads sometimes, making him believe they patrolled during daytime as well, and the constant reminder of the ninjas' presence through the Uchiha police corps. He also saw the serious looks on everyone's faces, and one crowed where the people talked in hushed tones and were too immersed in their gossip to see the patrol coming back with a group of tattered young children. He could only guess that someone had died. It reminded him of how they had gathered together in the future whenever someone didn't make it. Other than that, the streets and the houses looked almost identical to what he remembered. It was the same bright colors and wooden structures, the same smell of trees, earth and fresh air, mixed with the smells of fruit, spices and herbs from the marketplace, and food from the stands and restaurants. It made his stomach twist uncomfortably. He hadn't eaten anything but rabbit and the few berries and nuts he could find in the forest for ages. He really wanted something else, something he didn't have to hunt, slay and gut before preparing it. The people buzzing around were tauntingly similar to how he had known it in his future life. They went on with their daily lives as best they could, and pretended not to live in a ninja village involved in a war. He wasn't sure if he should be impressed by their ability to ignore what they didn't like to think about, or disgusted because they obviously gossiped about the war and its happenings. At least they preserved, he mused in silence. What do you think of Konoha so far? The Chunin asked and gave him another of his small smiles. Minato hummed. It seems happy. People try to be happy here, even if they are sad, tired or afraid. I like that. We do. If we let the war get to us, we have already lost, Uchiha said with conviction. He looked at the child again, and Minato was unsure of what to make of the penetrating gaze upon him. The Uchiha was clearly thinking about something, and he was wondering if it was something to do with him. He hoped not. What will happen to us? Minato asked as they neared the hospital. He could see some nurses helping wounded ninja outside in the park, making sure they didn't overexert themselves or escape from the hospital before they were completely patched together again. There were more of them than he remembered from his other lifetime, but this was during a war, and he knew he hadn't seen the wounded in the Civil War. He had spent most of his time in the forest, far away from their hideout. The Chunin didn't react to his question at first, opting to watch what his team leader was doing, but as the man simply exchanged a few words with a nurse and waved at the children, he turned back to the child in his arms. The doctors are going to make sure you are healthy. You might have to spend the night here, but it isn't bad, whatever the ninja will tell you. We don't like it because it reminds us we are still only human and not invincible. What will we do tomorrow when we have spent the night here? Minato persisted, much to the amusement of the Chunin. Tomorrow someone will come to ask you what happened to you, and then they will ask you what you want to do now. Maybe, if you are very lucky, the Hokage himself will come by to say hello to you and wish you welcome to Konoha. We can stay here and become ninja? Minato asked with a spreading smile. The Uchiha nodded and smiled back, while ruffling his hair for good measure. Minato was well aware that the ask you what happened to you was a psychological evaluation to determine if they were traumatized or otherwise mentally unstable. Too bad for them he was, at the moment, a genius child wanting to prove something to them. A possible evil little Minato jumped up and down in his mind while rubbing his hands and letting out a sinister laugh. The room they were let down in was the worst decorated room Minato had seen. 2 lives combined. It was the children's waiting room at the hospital and thus suitably decorated with painted domestic animals at the walls, painted clouds on the roof, and an abundance of stuffed animals. The colors were bright and too cheery, the animals were smiling merrily in a way animals would never do, and the other children were too loud. Minato sat down in a corner to play with a ball. First he bounced it up and down just to be left alone. Then he remembered the Rasengan and placed the ball in the palm of his small hand. It was too big and threatened to roll down, but after some juggling it stayed put. Minato tried to channel chakra like he remembered, but nothing happened. He tried again with the same depressing outcome. His chakra flared, true, but it didn't shape up the way he wanted it to. It didn't do anything like he wanted it to. He let out a sigh and glared at the ball. Stupid thing. He tried again and again, but all which happened was that he gained the attention of the remaining Chunin. The girl raised an eyebrow at the boy who was currently glaring daggers at the ball, and chuckled. What are you trying to do? She asked and sat down on her hunches in front of him. Minato hadn't anticipated anyone coming over to him, and lost his concentration. The ball fell from his hand and landed with a soft thud beside him before rolling to a stop in front of the girl. She smiled and picked it up. I wanted it to spin, he lied easily and was surprised at how easy the lie came to him. It wasn't a complete lie, so it might be that. It was a half lie, so it was partly true as well. The girl smiled at his childish antics and handed the ball back to him. How can you use chakra? You are only, 5 or 6 years old? She questioned, and Minato looked at her with the blankiest expression he could muster. This? He asked and summoned his chakra so he felt it swirl within him. Yes, that is chakra, he girl said and tilted her head while regarding him like a puzzle. Minato shrugged. I've done it for a long time, it is easy to do. Shouldn't I do it? He asked and laced his voice with concern. Oh no! It is impressive, that is all. Most children your age isn't able to unlock their chakra. I just wondered how you could do it, that is all. She was quick to reassure him, and with that done she went back to watching the other children as well. Minato kept to his corner, cursing foxes and life in general before he cursed his lot in life specifically. If it wasn't for that, he would have lived his life and died like any other human being. But no, he had to have an age-old, selfish demon sealed in him who simply refused to die and found some bizarre way to break every law of physics he could think of. Thanks to that, he was left in as a 5-year-old with no ninja training and couldn't even mold his chakra outside of his body. Freaking wonderful. Brooding in the small corner, and doing an amazing impression of his former best friend if he had known it, Minato didn't notice the girl sitting beside him. When he did, he wondered how long she had been there, and what she wanted. He hadn't talked much with the other children as they traveled. It hadn't exactly been a picnic, and Kanuto had made sure they were as silent as it was humanly possible to be. Considering the age they were, they had been very silent. When he first had heard their names, he regretted saying his name was Namikaze. After a while, however, he knew it was the right decision. He couldn't make himself remove Minato from history. The man had done incredible things, and he wanted to see if he could live up to that. If he would be able to make that name famed all over the elemental countries again. Since he had taken the chance to do it from the real Minato, he would do it for him, wherever that adventure took him. Kushina, he had noticed, was a little girl. She didn't complain like the others, she didn't cry at night, she didn't look disgusted when Kanuto hunted and returned with dead animals, but she did complain loudly about not being allowed to go with him, not being allowed to go as she liked and had to stay back no matter what, wouldn't understand that she was only 6 years old and wasn't as unbeatable as she thought she was. Pouted when she didn't get her will and reminded him overall of himself the last time he was a child. Minato wondered why no one had strung him up in a lamp post and had him hang there until he matured somewhat. Could be because he would have been a ridiculously easy target for Akatsuki that way. Oh well, it was a good thing to know his spirit had been inherited and wasn't a subconscious suppressing reaction to the less than optimal environment he grew up in. Minato, what are you going to do? She asked him out of the blue. He broke off his musings and furrowed his brow. I will become a ninja, so I'll stay here no matter what. Hey! We can become ninja together and be the most amazing team, she said and jumped to her feet. We'll be like the legendary ninja. I heard they are the best ninja from Konoha. Minato did not want to be like the legendary ninja. Partly because he knew their destiny, at least from his time, and partly because he felt like that would be to copy his former life. He didn't feel like doing that. He had already walked down that path once, and it didn't turn out too well. He wasn't dead, but being sent back in time to his father's body wasn't what he'd classify as a success either. Well, we can be friends, he offered carefully. He was pretty sure he'd graduate sooner than her, and he had every intention of doing just that. 5-year-old body or not, his mind was that of an 18-year-old ninja. The girl didn't seem to care. I bet I'll be a better ninja than you. Kushina gushed, and Minato almost saw a ghost of his former self over her. Oh good gods, it was going to be some long months until he could graduate. Their first day at the hospital passed in a blur when someone finally decided they had waited long enough. They were first washed, and Minato had never appreciated warm water more, fed, prodded, studied and then declared healthy enough to sleep. A nurse was left with them to make sure they did, and Minato did so without hesitation. The needle she wielded was intimidating enough to quell any protest he might have had. That had been yesterday. This day they had been herded from one person to the next, asked a multitude of questions in different wording but which basically meant the same, done a list of tasks Minato found utterly pointless, their reading and writing skills had been tested, and they had finally been allowed out in the park. Under supervision, of course. Kana, the little girl he had found out was 3 years old, wasn't with them. According to the nurse, she had contracted meningitis. It was dangerous for such a young child, still according to the nurse they had talked to. It had damped their mood for about as long as it took them to reach the park, but it was hard to feel worried when they could feel relaxed and play for the first time in weeks. Minato, however, didn't play in the sand with the rest. He settled for a swing and watched them thoughtfully. Kushina had kept him occupied for most of the day, proclaiming their impending greatness for anyone who bothered to listen, but he had a more realistic view. He was 5 years old. He knew there were people who had graduated only a few years older. Kakashi and Itachi came first to his mind, and he had tried to figure out how they had done it. The answer he came up with didn't suffice to reassure him. Firstly, his body was small. He could train it, but not too hard. It needed to grow after all, and it was far from developed. His reach wasn't anything to be proud of, so close combat was out of question, unless he wanted to headbutt someone. He was also far from strong enough to take on grown opponents, even if he used chakra to strengthen his muscles. No, close combat was not something he could do at the moment, and not for another few years in the least. The solution to his problem was something that left a sour taste in his mouth. Ever since his encounters with Itachi, he had disliked genjutsu. He didn't like how it messed with someone's mind, and while he felt mind games were fair game, genjutsu was something else entirely. It invaded a person's being in a way he felt was wrong on a fundamental level. You could make people believe anything, and you could break them without even drawing blood. It wasn't a fair fight, but he needed it now. He also had to be good at marksmanship, since when and if he got into a combat situation, he had to make his hits count. Since taijutsu was out, he only had chakra and weapons to rely on. Kenjutsu was out as well. He didn't think he'd do better with a sword than he would with his fists. His reach would still be too short. He didn't have the Sharingan and the speed to use it in a fight, and even if he did get the speed up, he would still not be able to foresee the moves of his enemies, so it could only help him so much. Ninjutsu was equally difficult to use practically. While he could do it, his chakra reserves were currently too small to be used like that. The ninjutsu attacks which would make enough damage to kill or permanently disable an enemy were too chakra consuming. It left him with low-level ninjutsu, throwing weapons and genjutsu. He didn't have to like it, but if he wanted to graduate and not spend years uselessly in the academy, he had to put up with it and ignore his aversion for genjutsu. He kicked the ground. The swing moved accordingly, swaying gently despite his gloomy conclusion. He would have to live with it and swallow whatever guilt he felt over it. It couldn't be that hard, seeing as he had gotten used to the less than honorable tactics they used in the Civil War. It had given him a whole new appreciation of the old saying, all's legal in love and war. Minato! What are you doing? That sentence had become Kushina's catchphrase when speaking to him. She used it every time he tried to think, and every time he didn't give her his undivided attention. Swinging, he deadpanned, and she frowned at him. He noted that she had green eyes, while her cousins were both blue-eyed. It didn't have to mean anything, but he was curious about the people who would have been his family if they had lived long enough. He supposed it was an ingrained part of who a human being was. You know, you don't have to be alone all the time, Kushina said, and climbed onto the swing beside him. I am used to be alone. The other children are boring, he answered sullenly. Her hurt expression made him rethink the wisdom of telling her that. You aren't boring, really? Mama always said I am different, and I often think too much. That is why I think they are boring, because they don't think, he said, stumbling over his explanation and feeling relieved when she nodded slowly. You are weird, Minato, but I'll be your friend anyway. Everyone needs a friend, and we'll still be the best ninja ever when we are big enough. Big enough, wasn't that the problem to begin with? He knew he'd go stir crazy if he had to endure lesson after lesson on the theory of Kawarimi again. The only thing he could think of as a reprieve was the lesser amount of history to go through. One war hadn't been fought yet, and one was still pending. They couldn't possibly have enough history to fill out all the history lessons he remembered from his last time at the academy. Thanks I guess. You are a bit weird too, you know. I have never met a girl as loud as you before. It was technically true. While Sakura had been violent on occasion when they were young, she had never been loud in the way Kushina was. Kushina acted like a boy, boisterous and challenging. She glared at him. I'm not loud. It is you who are silent. There is a difference. They kept swinging, and Minato had nearly managed to relax when Kushina let out a loud squeal of delight and jumped from the swing while it was high in the air. He watched her fly through the air and fall to the ground with shifting expressions. At first she looked thrilled, and then she realized she had to land. With realization came fear, and he saw her eyes widen as she headed for the ground. She would have hit it hard too, if she hadn't been caught. When Minato saw who had caught her, his eyes went first wide in recognition, then moist from sadness, and then he smiled happily. He had been told once that the third Hokage was only 13 years old when he became Hokage, but he had always thought of him as old. Now he stood in front of him with Kushina in his arms, with black hair and goatee, unwrinkled skin and a merry glint in his eyes. Kushina wriggled and landed softly when he let her go, and whirled around to see who had saved her from an unpleasant experience. Minato silently walked up beside her and bowed to the Hokage. Good afternoon, Hokage-sama, he greeted to make sure Kushina understood who the man in the white robes were. Not that it would matter to her if she was anything like he used to be. She would be awed, all right, but only until she got over it. The Hokage smiled gently at the children. Good afternoon, child. How are you? He asked, and even his voice was young. Not that of an old man, as Minato remembered from a past life. He wondered how old the Sandaime Hokage was now, and studied his face for a moment. He would say mid-30s, and didn't think he was too far off with that guess. It meant Asuma would be born around this time. That thought made him laugh in his mind. He was older than Asuma. Crazy, crazy world. I am fine, Hokage-sama. Thank you for saving Kushina. She is reckless sometimes. I am so not. I would have been just fine. Minato eyed her skeptically, but didn't pursue the issue. Instead, he looked at their new companion. He wasn't sure how he should approach the Hokage in this body. They didn't know each other, and while he was sure the Hokage would still help him, he wondered how to ask him. I am sure you would, the Hokage assured her, but his eyes were on the blonde child. From what he had heard, the young boy was a genius. He had scored fully on each test he'd been given and was more advanced than other children his age. The medic he had spoken with said he understood what was going on around him like an adult would, and he didn't like to be treated like a child his own age. I heard you had a strenuous journey here, he said, wanting to test the child. The girl looked nonplussed at him, but the blonde boy huffed. Minato wasn't sure what answer he should give, but decided to give him the most honest answer he could muster. It was hard, and we were tired, but Kanuto took good care of us, and we weren't attacked or anything. He said we were lucky not to be, he said blandly. The Hokage smiled a small smile. Yes, there are a lot of bandits on the roads. The war has destroyed the life of many people and some chose to become thieves. It is sad, but that is how life is. Minato bit his lip and gazed at the man with thoughtful eyes. Hokage-sama, how can we be ninja? We want to be ninja so we can take care of our friends, but I was told we had to graduate from the academy. At this, Kushina lit up as well. She hadn't entirely followed the conversation up to this point, not understanding all the words, but that she understood. The Hokage looked at the two eager faces and chuckled. It is true you'll have to graduate from the academy, but don't worry about it. If you want to, I will make sure your names are added to the classes. I understand you, he looked at Kushina, have had training from your clan? Kushina puffed her chest out and nodded proudly. Minato frowned. It wouldn't be too easy for her to adapt to not having adults to run to when she was stuck on something. He would have to help her out when he could. Karo too, if he wanted to be a ninja. Don't worry. I'll tell Minato everything I know, so he won't have any trouble at all. She promised, and it was cute in its own way. Minato decided against letting her down right away by telling her he didn't need her help. She would understand him in due time. Right now he just wanted a friend. That is good, we wouldn't want him to drop out, would we? The Hokage joked with a twinkle in his eyes. Minato raised an eyebrow and shook his head, reminding himself to let them have their fun. He didn't want to come over as a stuck-up brat after all. He'd make fun of them back when he got the opportunity. The Hokage straightened and looked at the other children playing in the sand and frowned. Of the 6 children from Whirlpool, 3 of them wanted to become ninja of Konoha, not including Kanuto. The youngest was too young and ill, and the black-haired twins said they didn't want anything more to do with bloodshed. They were 9, and he presumed they remembered and understood more than the younger children. Maybe not the blonde boy, but he had his own reasons. The children entering the academy would be under the martial law and considered wards of the village. The others would be put in the orphanage, and hopefully someone would adopt them in time. Minato had taken to look around while the Hokage pondered his new charges. More children had arrived, and now he could see people he vaguely recognized. Not because he recognized them personally, but because he knew how their children had looked when they were small. He saw Inoichi, which was particularly weird, because he had worked with the man in the future, and to see him without the steely and jaded eyes he remembered felt wrong. Now he looked more like an innocent girl, the poor guy, and Minato associated him with Haku. He certainly could pass for a girl if he dressed up for it. He saw another Yamanaka with him, a few years older, and since they didn't look like brothers he assumed it was a cousin. Babysitter and playmate in one. How convenient. They were talking to a girl with wild brown hair and red markings on her cheeks. That would be Kiba's mother, Tsum, as a 6-year-old girl. Minato smirked. He had a feeling she and Kushina would get along wonderfully, or crash equally hard against each other. Either way would provide plenty of entertainment. She wasn't accompanied by a puppy, so he guessed she hadn't gotten her dog yet. The large beast of a dog had made Akamaru look like your everyday poodle. The hairs all over the place to drool. He tilted his head when he heard barking, and a large gray dog came bouncing towards the girl before skidding to a halt beside her. The tongue lolled out of its mouth, and it was staring accusingly at the girl. Tsum just smiled proudly, and if what he knew of her was correct, she had just successfully escaped the Inuzuka compound and been found by the dog of a relative. At the other side of the playground, Minato could see something he was sure Niji would have appreciated. His uncle was currently unsuccessfully trying to free himself from one of the nets used to climb in, and his brother stood by and watched him curiously. A woman with long dark hair observed him with a bemused smile on her face. She had to be their mother, because she did nothing to help the Hyuga clan heir, and there were 2 other members of the clan sitting down at a bench close by. They were playing a game of shogi, and didn't seem to give a damn what their heir was up to. He could see other children as well, but didn't recognize them like he did the parents of his friends in the future. It was rather anticlimactic to see them as children and not the powerful and wise ninja he knew. They behaved like children, and that was unsettling. Maybe he shouldn't hope for Inoichi to gain the eyes of someone who had done one too many interrogations, or for Hayashi to gain that emotionless face, but it didn't make it better that he knew they could get those looks. Shaking himself to get rid of the thoughts, he tuned back on the Hokage. He too had gotten from wherever his thoughts had been wandering, and focused on the not-so-happy little girl in front of him. She had been trying to get his attention, and since he was used to deal with his advisors, he was used to ignore unimportant sounds. Not everything they wanted to talk about was important after all, but they were his teammates, and he didn't have the heart to tell them no when they came by to relate the latest happenings in their lives. Most of it was completely useless to him as Hokage, even if it was interesting to him as their friend. He only hoped they one day managed to differ between the roles. Yes, you will be living with your cousins. In fact, that is why I came here today. I wanted to let you know of your living arrangements. As I said, you will be living with your cousins, and Minato will live in the apartment beside yours. Minato agreed to check in on him from time to time, and to help him with anything he could. Minato is also allowed to stay with you whenever he wants to, the Hokage informed them, and Minato quickly nodded. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, how the law worked for orphans in the military system of Konoha. They were mostly left on their own, in the belief that they were old enough to be trained as soldiers and thus old enough to take care of themselves, but someone would make sure just to be safe. It was simple and it produced lots of slightly disturbed ninjas. Just look at how Kakashi and Guy turned out. Though, considering their lifestyle and work, they would have ended up disturbed either way. Might as well start them early, it built character. Minato will pick you up later, but he had some things he had to do before he could do that. In the meantime, you should try to make some friends, HM? The Hokage continued mildly, and Minato sighed. Yes, make friends indeed. It wasn't enough that he had to endure one babbling 6 years old, he was expected to thrive among them. He couldn't wait till he hit puberty. Even so, he thanked the Hokage politely, and kicked Kushina in the shin to make sure she did too. Honestly, to have been raised by parents she was awfully dense when it came to certain things, or she didn't care. The latter was possible the most likely reasoning. The Hokage continued on the talk to the other children, and Minato was in half a mind to follow him, but let it drop. He wouldn't be able to get to know what he wanted to know from him now anyway. He would have to check at laws of graduation on his own. He wondered just how young he could be, if there even was a lower age limit for graduating, and what the requirements were. Kushina had gotten tired of the swings, and dragged him with her to the girl with the dog. Minato could say a lot about the wisdom of approaching an unknown dog to pet it, but kept his silence and let her break the ice. He watched as she announced their arrival and asked if it was alright if she petted the dog. Sim gave her consent, and the girls soon rolled around in the grass with the dog. Minato wrinkled his nose at the unhygienic behavior. True, he had done the same as a child, but that was before he knew better. It is hard to tell who the dog is, a voice muttered beside him, and Minato looked from the giggling girls to the blonde Yamanaka looking on with the same wrinkled nose as he currently sported. Who would have thought Inoichi was such a cleanly child? I wonder if they know what is in the drool, Minato responded and felt a shiver down his spine when he saw Kushina being licked over her mouth and nose. Some things were simply disgusting, and dog's sliver was one of them. Dogs put their noses everywhere, sniffed each other in unmentionable places, and where their nose went, their tongue followed. He did not want to have a tongue that had been any of those places all over his face unless it was a cute girl's, and for that he would have waited at least 10 years to fully appreciate it. They wouldn't care. If that girl is the same as some, she'll like it, Inoichi informed dully, and Minato grimaced. Her name is Kushina, and if the girl, Tsum, likes to be loud and noisy, they are most likely the same. I am Namikaze Minato, by the way. It is nice to meet you, he said and tilted his head in a greeting. My name is Yamanaka Inoichi. I am not a girl, the other boy said sternly while he cast a glare at Tsum, and Minato stiffened a smile. He was sure there was a story behind this, but he wouldn't pry for the moment. The two blondes looked at each other, and like all small boys they decided the girls could take care of themselves and went to find other small boys to play with. Minato smiled as they neared the Hyuga twins. He had subtly steered Inoichi towards them, because he was curious. They certainly didn't act like the noblest clan in Konoha at the moment, and to see Hayashi try to figure out how the net was supposed to work was entertaining. They might give him some hints and get to know Hizashi as well. It was strange, but the people he knew as parents were now his potential friends and classmates. The sun filtered in the windows in a small apartment to the east of Konoha. The building was ordinary, to the point where people would pass it by without a second glance. It held 4 apartments, 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs, and had small gardens at the front of the building towards the street. Behind it was another street, this one less used and the home of no less than 8 homeless cats. Across that street was a smaller row of houses occupied solely of civilians. That wasn't really important, however. What was important was the lake behind those houses. There was a small path around it, and an area of greenery between the lake and the buildings surrounding it. For most of the populace in Konoha, it didn't mean much. It was a lake and a small park, and the usually visitors were couples in love, or elderly people trying to get away from the hustle and bustle in the village. The lakeside even had a small platform with benches and tables if someone wanted to have a picnic there. It wasn't often, but it happened that someone was there, and if they came by during the afternoon or the evening, chances were they would happen upon a small blonde boy training to be a ninja. To Minato it was the perfect place. It had water and trees, an area to train. He would set up blinks in the shrubbery and between the trees to throw shurikens and kunais, and practice his chakra control. After having lived his former life with terrible chakra control, it was an odd feeling to suddenly have excellent control. It wasn't perfect, and he didn't need it to be perfect since he wasn't opting to be a medic, but it was still way above the regular. It baffled him again and again how easily the chakra flowed in his body, and he wondered if it was something to do with the body, or if everyone had their chakra flowing like this without a seal to constantly feed more chakra into their system. When he first started, he had nearly cried when he discovered how little chakra he actually had, but it had increased slowly as he kept training. He could hold the transformation technique for over 2 hours without significant drain on his reserves, which he wouldn't have considered an achievement in his former life, but now considered a significant step up. True, it was an E-ranked, low chakra consuming technique, but his body was small and there was only so much chakra it could produce. It had taken him a while to accept that, but he had accepted he would do with what he had already the day they were released from the hospital. That had led him to review all he knew of genjutsu, which was abysmal little. To be praised as a genius had helped him overcome that easily. The first years at the academy were all theory and physical training. They didn't do chakra until the children were 8, but he had unlocked his and the teachers quickly came to the conclusion that he was bored. He could answer any question they asked, the books were made for 7-year-olds after all, do any task they sat him and for someone so young, complained surprisingly little. The only time he had uttered words of discouragement was during a field excursion to the forest, where they were to learn the basics of eatable plants. He had looked at the plants, and told them rather bluntly that he had lived off of these plants after the death of his mother and refused to eat them again unless he was about to starve to death. They were right, he was bored, but for completely different reasons. The first years, consisting mostly of children 6 or 7 years old, depending on when their parents felt it prudent to start their ninja education, weren't all that great at reading. It was slow going, and he wanted to bang his head in the wall more than once when another brat stuttered through the text. It might have to do with having an entirely different brain than in his last body. Again, the thought of having something in common with the Orochimaru he remembered made him shiver, but he had a better memory. Not photographic by any means, but it was better. He didn't have to read the same part again and again to remember, and he even understood what it said. He couldn't be sure if it was because he physically had another brain, or because his mind was mature and was able to concentrate on something for more than 5 minutes. Either way, he didn't complain, admitting that yes, Minato was fully capable of reading, writing, doing math and even knew the entire curriculum of basic ninja theory. The teachers had let him skip a year and put him with their second years. Kushina had not been happy with him for that. She had sulked for a week before she forgave him, and he had to tell her how to unlock her chakra to earn that forgiveness. Not that she was capable of sitting still long enough to do it yet, but she was getting there. She would probably unlock it at the same time as the children from clans, considering how they had relatives showing them how to do it and motivating them. Minato, while happy he didn't have listened to the stuttering anymore, was less than pleased with being placed with the second years. The second years was the first actual ninja class, which in peacetime lasted for 4 years and in wartime for 2 or, in most cases, 3 years. Most children were 8 years, or 9, if they didn't make it through the first year the first time they tried, and would be about 10 or 11 when they graduated in a wartime. 12 in peacetime. One could say they were arguably annoyed with the genius showing them up, and they didn't hesitate to let their feelings known. While annoying, it wasn't the reason Minato didn't like it. He had wanted to be placed in the graduating class straight away. Instead, he found himself reciting the founding of Konoha and the correct way of handling kunais. The last part had proven to be somewhat useful. In his new body, his aim was off. While it was still impressive for someone who, apparently, didn't have any previous ninja training and was 5 years old, soon to be 6, it wasn't what he would like it to be. He would like to live to be older than 18 this time around, and to do that he had to survive his childhood first. Going through the basic academy taijutsu simply proved his previous grievances with the small body. He could do the katas perfectly, but if the opponent was someone larger than an 8-year-old, he wouldn't be able to do much. As frustrating as that was, he had time and people willing to help him with his genjutsu. It was incredible what the teachers were willing to teach him if he asked nice enough and reminded them that he was a prodigy. Not that they needed reminding most of the time. They were talking about him in the corridors and at their lunchroom. He had heard them when he went to ask his sensei about a genjutsu he had found. When one of them had had a practical lesson, they were praising him as if he was the best thing to happen since electricity. He wondered if this was what Itachi and Kakashi had to go through, because if it was, he felt sorry for them already. To begin with, it was good to have the expectations directed at him. It felt exhilarating to know that they really thought he could do all the tasks they gave him, and believed in him. It was a new feeling, since he hadn't had it the first time he went through the academy. Okay, it wasn't fair to compare the two. This time around he had all the memories from a life as a ninja and a war, a mind which was matured and experienced, even if it was only in his head. No matter what it was, the expectations soon got old, and the constantly raising of those expectations made them equally harder to live up to. It was as if they never got satisfied. As soon as he proved he could do something, they found something more advanced for him to do. And so it went. If he had been a child for real, he knew he would have been terrified of letting them down. Now he simply did what they asked, even if it sometimes took him the entire afternoon and evening to do it. He didn't know why he did it though. That was something he, as introspective as he could be, hadn't figured out, or didn't want to figure out. Some of it was actual fear. He wanted them to believe he was a genius after all, and he wanted them to remember the name Namikaze Minato as one of the brightest students they had ever had. He didn't want to think what might happen if he didn't live up to that, so in a way, he was caught in the same trap an actual child would fall for. It was a never-ending circle of fear and exhilaration. His interest in genjutsu had been noted by the teachers though, and that was the reason why he was currently by the lake at 7 in the morning. Yesterday he had been unable to complete a genjutsu technique, which had rendered him unable to sleep most of the night. At 5 he gave up on sleeping and went out to stubbornly get the stupid technique done. It was the highest ranking one he had tried, a C, ranked one, and it was a hell of a lot more trouble than the D, ranked genjutsu techniques he had tried. He had of course mastered the clone technique. He wasn't even sure if that was something he should even mention, but the teachers seemed to be beyond themselves when he created 2 perfect clones at his first try. His first try in front of them, that was. It hadn't taken him long, but he had been practicing them on his own beforehand. It was another occasion when he marveled over the differences in his chakra control. The other 2 techniques had taken him longer. Mostly because he had no previous experience with them to fall back on. He had to learn them by trial and error, and with genjutsu that was difficult. It was hard to tell whether or not the technique was done right when he used it on animals, and he didn't want to try them out on a passing civilian. He had toyed with the idea of asking one of his friends for help, but didn't want to use genjutsu on them outside of a spar. He wasn't sure if he wanted to use it on them during a spar either, for that matter. In the end, he had ended up asking his teachers for help, and they had let him try his genjutsu out on them. They were both D-ranked, demonic illusions, hell viewing technique and mist-servant technique. The first one was a basic for a whole series of demonic illusions. Most of them were currently out of his skill set, but he had hopes of starting on them within a year or at the most 2. The simplest one, the one he had learnt, showed the target a horrifying vision which would appear real to the target. It was exactly what Minato hated the most with genjutsu, but when he had mastered it he had been proud all the same. He put it down to knowing that he could, with this one mastered, master all the other demonic illusions if he put his mind to it. The technique he had worked on for 2 hours straight, while the sun rose, was actually a set of 2. They were named Demonic Illusion, False Surrounding Technique, and Demonic Illusions, Double False Surrounding Technique. The first basically changed the appearance of an object or an area, while the second one would weave a secondary illusion on top of the first. While getting the first one to work was easy enough, blending the secondary layer on top of the first proved to be close to impossible without disrupting the first layer. At least he had felt like that. The chakra of the first illusion would waver in contact with the second layer, and thus be disrupted. It was the general idea of disrupting or ending a genjutsu after all, to disturb the flow of chakra screwing with your senses. He had been unable to come up with an idea of what to do to make them meld together like they should without actually melding, and that had kept him awake. After turning over in his bed more times than he chose to keep count of, he had realized how his blanket had twisted around him and trapped him in a cocoon of cloth. From that he had realized he could do the same with the chakra of the illusion. If the first layer was a steady layer with chakra, like a flat blanket, the second layer could twist around the first without touching the first. Instead of 2 flat blankets on top of each other, he needed 1 flat blanket, and 1 twisted blanket around it. It was easy enough in theory. Practice always proved harder. With the theory down, at least he had something to work from. He had been working steadily for 2 hours, and finally thought he had managed to get it right. It was a major achievement. He had been trying to do it for nearly a month now. He smirked and allowed himself to lie down in the soft grass and just listen to all the sounds of the awakening village. The vendors were opening their stands, the shops were opening one by one, and people started to move around. He never got tired of listening to and observing Konoha like this. It reminded him of how it had been before Pain leveled it, and what he had fought for in the Civil War. Maybe it was a defensive reaction on his part, to justify some of what they had done, but he chose to believe they had done the right thing. It was also calming, to know that the people around him was part of Konoha, just like him. They were all part of the same village, shared the same home, and that created a bond between them, even if they didn't know everyone else in the village. He stretched out and lazily watched the sun sparkle in the water as it rose high enough for the sunrays to hit it. If it wasn't for his stomach grumbling for food in the academy, he could easily have fallen asleep there, seeing as he had finally finished the damn jutsu. A sense of accomplishment washed over him as he made his way past the civilian houses and cordially greeted some of his new neighbors. He had made sure to get to know them enough to greet them by name when he saw them, and to appear as the perfect little genius child he was pretending to be. Actually, he had picked apart everything he knew of the geniuses from his future life and come to a conclusion. They were all, without fail, well liked. That is, unless they did something to discourage that feeling, like killing off most of your clan or being rather homicidal like Gaara used to be. It didn't matter how antisocial they acted, people still loved them to bits. He didn't want to go down that road, even if had noticed that he spent little time doing what most 6-year-olds do. It wasn't really his fault. Once upon a time he would have found it fun to play tag, but he was too old for that now. Besides that, he did spend time with Kusina and Inoichi. They were often joined by Tsum, who was talking about getting her dog once they had graduated to the next class. He was also their primary source of homework help, as he had dubbed it. Kushina lived next door to him, and while she had an older cousin, he was most of the time out on missions, or taking care of the youngest Uzumaki. 5-year-old Kero was nothing like Minato was, and acted more like a 3-year-old in desperate need of attention. The other two had their clans, of course, but they claimed it was funnier to do their homework together, at his place. He didn't mind, he actually liked to be the center of a group of friends, but sometimes their expectation levels were even higher than the ones directed at him from the teachers. They seemed to think he had the answers to every question they could think of, and while to them he could act omnipotent, he was sure there would come a day when he would have to say I don't know. He wondered what would happen that day, and if they would still look at him with the same amazement and awe. His apartment wasn't large, it had a bathroom, a bedroom and a combined living room and kitchen. He liked it though, and it was a home. It wasn't just a tree in the middle of a forest, where weather and enemies could surprise him at any moment. He smiled slightly as he made his way past the kitchen table, where Kushina had forgotten her homework the previous day. Seriously, she could be so forgetful it made him cringe. If she didn't prolong her attention span, that forgetfulness was going to get her killed one day. He glanced at the clock and hurried to take a shower, change clothes and boil water for tea while toasting bread. He could predict Kushina and her little cousin pretty well after almost a year of living next door to them. They would get up at 7:30 in the morning, and if Kanuto was home, that wasn't a problem. If he wasn't home, Kushina would try her hand on breakfast, before giving it up as a lost cause and head over to him. He would be ready with tea and toasts, and not comment on her lack of domestically skills. She was only 7 years old, and he didn't expect her to be a master chef by any means. He only hoped she got better in time. Today, on the other hand, he was less than pleased with the notion of having the two exuberant cousins over for breakfast. He was tired, damn it, and keeping up with them was a trial in and of itself. He busied himself with reading her paper on the proper use of body replacement technique, clone technique and transformation technique. It was the standard 3 academy techniques, together with the rope escape technique and cloak of invisibility technique. He absent-mindedly corrected her 4th hand sign for the body replacement from tiger to dog, and pointed out the errors she made in her spelling. As he had foreseen, at 8 there was a rap knock on his door before it flew open and Carol waved at him brightly. He hadn't said much since their arrival in Konoha, and didn't generally speak unless he had to. He was slightly more open around people he knew well, but he was bound to be the odd one out when he started the academy in a year. Minato put it down to the whole ordeal he'd been through. Kushina said he was shy. Speaking of which, Kushina, you didn't get the hand seals right, he said, and lifted her papers so she could see. For a moment she looked confused as to what he was talking about, before he saw that telltale coloring of her cheeks and the following huff. She didn't like being reprimanded, especially not by someone her own age. Undaunted by her irritation, he continued. If it was one thing he had learnt, it was the importance of getting the hand seals down. Irika-sensei had practically drilled it into them. Back then he hadn't understood the importance, but as he learned more techniques and started to see the subtle differences between some techniques due to the hand seals, he understood. If you use tiger in the replacement technique, your chakra will come out too volatile and it'll destroy any control you have over it, he said, and handed Kero a slice of toast without looking from the paper. He corrected the last paragraph in time to see Kushina primly picking it from him and stuff it in her bag. He sighed and reached for the jam. The dog is reliable and persistent. The tiger is energetic and volatile. It is understandable that you can't exchange one for the other, he said in way of explanation. He didn't look at her, but loaded his toast with jam before handing the jar over to the annoyed wannabe Kunoichi. She eyed him carefully before she found her papers again and frowned. She would have to rewrite the entire assignment, since it had corrections all over it. The teacher wouldn't be happy with such a mess. You have destroyed my homework. She shrieked and glared at him. Minato, having finished correcting her paper, was rereading his own. The teacher had asked them to research a brand of ninja techniques of their choice, and he had chosen Genjutsu. His work on the demonic illusions was part of his research. No one was going to accuse him for not being thorough. Hearing her outburst made him focus on her and grimaced. No, I didn't. I pointed out where you are wrong, just like the sensei will do, and now you have an opportunity to rewrite it and get a better grade than if you had handed it in as it was. It wasn't that bad. I don't need you to help me out, I would have seen it myself, she muttered half-heartedly. They both knew that wasn't true, she wouldn't have seen it. Or if she did reread it, she might have, but she wouldn't reread it. That was her problem most of the time. Kero looked from one to the other, not sure who he should side with. He knew, quite well, that Minato was right most of the time, but Kushina was his cousin who he lived with and would have to endure her tantrum if he pissed her off. Not an experience he valued, so he changed the topic altogether. Minato are going to get bad teeth, he piped up, and the two older children turned from their staring contest to give him weird looks. What makes you say that? Minato asked nonplussed. That was not the everyday comment from the usually reasonable boy. The redhead sagely pointed at the jam on his toast. You eat too many sweets. Big brother says the teeth will rot if we eat too much sweet food, he said, with childish honesty and wisdom. Minato raised both eyebrows while Kushina wore the most amused expression. Maybe his teeth will fall out, so no one will understand what he says when he acts like a stuck-up know-it-all, she suggested with a gleeful gleam in her eyes. In that moment Minato seriously thought she actually hoped that would happen. Kero snickered while imagining his second big brother without teeth. That's superstition. We have dentists for a reason, you know, he mumbled and went back to his paper. He didn't really want to destroy their fun, but he wasn't in the mood to be the butt of their jokes today. Kushina rolled her eyes at him. What crawled up your ass and died? She asked, mollifying, and Minato was once again astonished by her choice of language. She sure didn't talk like any girl he knew, or 7 years old for that matter. He guessed she picked it up from Kanuto when he wasn't careful of his wording. Nothing. I was trying to help you, you know. You have the end-of-year test in a few days after all. If you don't pass it, you won't be able to graduate, he reminded her. It had the desired effect on her. She picked up the papers he had corrected and read them over, before she asked for new ones to rewrite it. She knew where she could find it, but every time she had been successfully chastised she would be all polite until she forgot about it. Minato finished his paper and sipped the rest of his milk and, like every morning, filled a glass of milk for Kero and gave him a long, steady look before he drank it. Honestly, that kid was not one who should give others advices on their diets. He was about to clear the table when Kushina spoke up again, having copied down most of the jotted corrections on her assignment. Hey, Minato, why is it you are so fixated on the hand seals anyway? She asked curiously. Minato stopped and blinked. That was new. She didn't usually ask why he corrected her on something, just accepted it. They channel the way you concentrate your chakra. If you mess up you might blow up. It is as simple as that. Kushina sat in silence while thinking over what he had said, and nodded grudgingly. I guess, but why? Minato wondered whether she read her textbook, or just came to him each time she was confused. Some of them don't work together, some of them aren't evenly mixed between spiritual and physical energy, and some of them represent elements that won't work together. Lots of reasons, like ram won't work with ox, and snake won't work with boar. Rat is water element, and horse is fire element. If you are going to make a technique from scratch you need to think of which of them represents what you need for the chakra to do, and which of them that'll work together to do that. He thought for a moment before he came up with a good example. One of the genjutsu techniques I know, the demonic illusion, hell viewing technique, uses the hand seals snake and rat. The snake is subtle, discreet and manipulative, and is more yang than yin. The rat is affable, secretive and exploitive, and is more yin than yang. Together, they make for a good genjutsu and balance each other pretty well. What makes the technique weaker than many other genjutsu is the rat's water element against the snake's fire element. It weakens the abilities of the snake, making it less manipulative than it could have been. On the plus side, the exploitive side of the rat is stronger, so the caster of the genjutsu doesn't have to come up with an illusion for the victim to see. The jutsu exploits the fears of the victim all on its own. Kushina and Kero stared at him while blinking. He sighed. One day they would get it, but not today. Their walk to the academy took them through most of Konoha, which was why they had to leave half an hour before it started. Kero was left with a nice old lady living in the apartment under them. Old Lady Chinatsu, as Kero affectionately called her when she was out of earshot. The walk took Minato and Kushina past the Yamanaka flower shop, where they'd pick up Inoichi. Usually it wouldn't be a problem, but today seemed to be the day the gods had deemed to play dirty. Inoichi had overslept, causing them to run the remaining distance to the academy. It wouldn't have been so bad if the 2 first years didn't have a test of their knowledge of the first great ninja war, while Minato was late for the taijutsu warm-ups and was punished with more rounds around the training ground. He was really not in the mood for that, having slept next to nothing that night and trained for hours. When lunch came around, his energy level was dropping dangerously low, and at that moment, he started a habit he would take with him for years to come. He refilled his depleting energy with sugar. Minato lay on his back and watched the birds fly over him. He was at the top of the academy roof, a place few would go looking for him. He wasn't hiding, no, he was doing a tactical retreat. He called it that anyhow. Inoichi would come right out and say he was hiding, and Kushina would laugh until she cried if she ever knew why he was up here in the first place. He suspected she knew, but she had never confronted him, and Inoichi had never said anything to her as far as Minato knew. It all started when they started their new year at the academy. It had been innocently, like all things usually are when you stumble upon them. He had been on his way to the academy with Kushina, Inoichi and Kero. Now, that was where his problem had started. Kero reminded him a lot of a quieter and more docile Konohamaru. He was an adoring younger brother who looked up to him because he was awesome. While Kushina, Inoiki and he were all rather used to the academy, it had been Kero's first week. To get to know each other better, all the students in the class were allowed to invite one relative to their class. Kero, since Kanuto was on a mission, had decided that while Kushina was cool and all, Minato was the better choice. He was as much a big brother as Kanuto was, only not related by blood. He had not expected to have Ito do anything but follow him there and wait for his classes to start. He had not expected the teacher to give the new students a short and inspiring preach on his virtues as a prodigy in the shinobi arts, and be asked for a demonstration. He had reluctantly agreed, and thought he would get away with some simple technique used by every genin around. Kero would have none of it, and talked him into showing off the technique he had spent most of his short vacation on learning and mastering. The only reason why he had chosen that technique was from stung pride. He had never been really good at fire techniques in his former life, and he would like to see if he could get better at them this time around. He was supposed to become Hokage, so he liked to believe he should do some fire techniques. The chosen one, Fire Release, Phoenix Immortal Technique, was chosen simply because he thought the small fireballs were cooler than one big one. It was a testimony to his chakra control that he was able to pull it off. While most genin actually had the chakra to do C-rank techniques, most didn't have the control needed to do it, and so they wasted much of their chakra. It was the reason why you either had a decent pool of chakra and good control, or large reserves if a genin was able to do them. Minato belonged in the first category. What he hadn't anticipated, aside of the stunned looks of the parents and teachers present, was the absolute awe he filled the first years with. In the span of a few hand seals and a quick breath, he became their newest hero. From that day onwards, they had followed him wherever he went on the academy grounds, and begged him to show them more amazing techniques. He hadn't. The routine quickly became too tiresome to keep up with, so he developed methods to avoid them. He used to sneak up on the roof during the lunch break for a snack and a small nap, and if anyone asked, it was because he liked the view. To and from the academy he was more or less safe and able to hide behind Kushina and Inoichi, and to some extent Kero, even if he shielded him half-heartedly. He wanted to see more techniques too, so he would dog him during the day whenever he could as well. This day was no different, but one of the last he would spend at the academy. He had already taken his written test, and after lunch he would have the practical test. He wondered briefly if the graduation exam would differ from the one he remembered. Despite the war having lulled to almost non-existent for the past year, the village was still in war mode. When he took his exam in the future, or something like that, it had been peace for several years. If he remembered correctly, it had been peace for 7 years. Now they had a situation where no one really knew where they stood. The written test had been much the same: trap making, basic strategy, basic leadership skills in case they got separated from their sensei, history, rules and regulations, and some on techniques. He was fairly sure he had aced it. He rummaged through his pockets for a Pocky and was relieved when he found one. It wasn't his favorite flavor, but banana would do in lack of strawberry. Closing his eyes to doze in the sun and eat his sweet, he hadn't expected someone else to intrude upon his solitude. He was actually a little peeved and opened one eye to regard the boy who entered the roof casually. He was lean and slouched a little, with a pineapple-shaped hairdo which immediately told Minato who the person was. He hadn't met Shikaku in this time, since he hardly spent a month in the same class. A 9-year-old Inoichi was following him as collected as always. He had, to his luck, grown a little more boyish over the years. He still had long blonde hair, pale skin and blue eyes and a slim and lithe body, but his face was getting more like that of a boy. Shikaku stopped in his steps when he saw him, but Inoichi grinned and waved at him. "Told you he'd be here," the blonde boy said enthusiastically. Shikaku made a noise which could be interpreted as an agreement, but he seemed more irritated with the whole situation. Minato stretched and resigned himself to a social call rather than a catnap. "What are you doing here?" he asked with more irritation than he originally intended. Inoichi raised an eyebrow at the younger boy and a snort escaped him. "What got you so worked up?" "We were just going to ask you something. No need to get your panties in a twitch." Shikaku watched them with lazy eyes and a small glint behind that exterior which told Minato that the Nara had found him curious. Curious to a Nara was a phenomenon they didn't immediately understand, and he knew he would be subtly observed until that curiosity was sated. Shikamaru had had the same glint in his eyes after the fight with Niji, and Minato felt pretty sure Shikaku was every bit as determined at understanding him as Shikamaru had been. "Peachy, yeah, sorry about that. I was almost asleep." "What is it you wanted?" Minato asked. He didn't mean to sound rude, but they had interrupted his sleep time, and he was grouchy whenever that happened. He still wasn't someone who jumped out of bed with all the energy of an overly excited puppy in the morning. If he could, he would have liked nothing more than to sleep in, but 2 years of constantly trying to outdo himself had made him get up every morning at 5 to train. It worked fine as long as he napped during the day. Inoichi was aware of his habits, so he shrugged the previous offense off and grinned. "Ask you what the exam's like?" Shikaku wanted to plan ahead, he said, and smirked at the brown-haired boy. Minato looked stonily at him. That was so Nara. Get away with the least amount of work, and do it the most efficient way. He quirked his lips. Nara? He asked, and Shikaka straightened from his slouched position and nodded. Nara Shikaku, it is nice to meet you, he greeted neutrally. How Nara to first make sure if he was someone worth keeping as a close ally and friend, one of the two or just a fellow leaf ninja before they made any attempts on befriend their object of interest. Namikaze Minato, Minato said with a nod. He smiled at the Nara, and laughed a little. Don't worry about the test. It is easy if you read the textbook. You can pass and get a great grade by doing just that. If you want to best it, you'll have to read some extra material, but most of it is found in the academy library. I'd recommend strategy, trap making, and some basics on the role of a leader. The two boys gave him weird looks, or rather Inoichi did, while Shikaka simply stared at him. You know, you are the only person who would bother with something like that, he commented, and Minato tilted his head to the side with a deceptively harmless smile. That is why I graduate a year before you, while being a year younger than you, he answered, and Shikaku rolled his eyes to the heavens as if to ask why he had to put up with them. Though, he secretly found their bickering amusing. Minato rummaged through his pockets again, but he didn't have more sweets on him and looked hopefully at Inoichi. Said boy shook his head. I don't eat sweets for lunch, Minato. Have you considered having a real lunch for once? I brought a real lunch as you call it, but I still want something to eat. Speaking of which, Kushina pestered me into agreeing for us to meet at the barbecue shop she likes this evening to celebrate my graduation, he said and rose from his sitting position. It wasn't that much left of his free time, and he wouldn't get any sleep with them there. He might as well invite them. Are you that sure you'll pass? Shikaka asked intrigues. Even the best students used to fret over their exam. Inoichi snorted. You don't know him, so I'll let that one slip and pretend you never asked something so stupid. He knows every damn thing there is to know, and can pretty much do anything. It is a reason why he is allowed to graduate when he is only 8. He isn't human. Minato rubbed the back of his head awkwardly and smiled an equally uncomfortable smile. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Inoichi, but I would rather remain human, if you don't mind. I don't plan on joining the Inuzuka kennel anytime soon, he muttered, but the two other boys didn't seem to pay him any mind. He let out a defeated sigh. You are welcome to come too, if you want to, he told Shikaku and headed back to the stairs. It was time to get this over with and endure the following cooing and fawning. He snorted when he realized the actual practical test hadn't changed any from this time to the time he knew. It was ridiculous. They could at least have varied it slightly from year to year. Not enough to change the exam itself, just enough to make it more interesting from the students. There were plenty of easy D-ranked jutsu after all, and they could have chosen some of them in addition to the standards. That way the students wouldn't know years in advance what they would be tested in, and they would have something to surprise potential enemies with. During the shuriken and kunai testing, he decided to give the teachers and jonin instructors scouting out their potential students something to gawk at. Having thrown his shuriken rather lazily, he clapped his hands together in front of his face and spoke surely. Wind release. Gale wind palms. The gust of wind ripped the air in front of him and quickly overtook the spinning shurikens, adding to their speed and strength. As they hit their target, they burrowed deeply into the wooden blink and didn't stop until the tips of the throwing stars had reached through the blink. The tearing winds further sliced the wood, gashing the blink and cutting of large chunks. Minato tilted his head with a small smile and waved at where he felt the jonin were hiding. It wasn't nice spying on their future students. After all, there were rustling in the leaves, and some of the trees shook a little, making the chunin teachers who had previously been stunned at his little show smirk and snicker. They were used to the antiques of their colleagues, but it didn't mean they liked having them hanging around their workplace. For the jonin to be caught in the act, so to speak, was funny, especially when it was an 8-year-old not yet a genin who caught them. The whispers from the other students, however, he could have done without. That's so cool, a boy with brown hair mumbled awestruck. Minato thought his was named Sho, but wasn't sure. He didn't know the rest of the class that well, and he hadn't cared to get to know them either. That wasn't really true. He hadn't had the need to, seeing as he would always find his friends from the lower years to be with, and didn't have the time after school. The others seemed to agree. He had gained quite a reputation among the students. He wasn't sure where it had come from, or exactly what it was, but they didn't bother him like they did their first year. Perhaps they finally understood he could kill them if he wanted to, or at least maim them good. It made them actually respect them, and Minato was sure he would never understand human nature if that was why they respected him. It was a subtle difference between this and the respect he got from his friends. They respected him for who he was. These people saw someone or something else in him. It was unnerving. He didn't spend time worrying about it. He was happy when he later that night had company of Mr. and Mrs. Yamanaka, Inoichi, Kero, Kushina, and Shikaku. Inoichi's father and mother had unexpectedly come with their son, and congratulated Minato wholeheartedly. They had even bought him a new set of kunais as a graduation gift. He wasn't sure what to say, but stuttered his thanks, and for once he acted like a child should, much to his chagrin. The parents had chuckled and ruffled his hair. Kushina, Kinuto, and Kero had bought him a basic medical set. All active ninja were required to carry one in their pouch, so it was a practical gift. Shikaka gave him what pleased him the most, sweets. The team placement took place 4 days later. Minato hadn't thought about it, but now he would have to team up with people he didn't know, while he still thought of his previous team as his. It wasn't possible, he knew, but he still felt sad at the thought of losing that little bit of himself. He wasn't sure if he could say he was himself anymore. He wasn't who he had been, and probably not who he should be, but he was someone, that much was clear. He did have a personality, he did have his thoughts, and he did have a goal even if who he was getting blurred. The classroom was filled with chattering new students who all kept talking to calm their nerves. Minato chose his seat at the back of the room, where less people would notice him and badger him for his stunt at the exam. He had heard people talk about him when he walked past them. That in itself wasn't strange to him, he had been the most whispered about person in Konoha after all, but what they said was new. They were praising him and looked at him with pride and amazement, as if he was somehow theirs. Too bad he didn't feel like indulging them and satisfy their curiosity. Escaping? The flat yet soft voice asked from beside him, and he stiffened momentarily before nodding shortly. He didn't turn to see who spoke to him, since any movement could draw attention to them. Tactical retreat, he answered, and he could have sworn he felt amusement from the person beside him even if he didn't give any outwards token of that. He glanced to his side and saw a large jacket, and immediately raised an eyebrow. He hadn't been aware of any Abirame in his class, but then again, they didn't make much of themselves. Always trying to remain invisible and unnoticed. The perfect spies, Abirame Shibi. I was wondering how you knew of the Jonin watching us at the exam? So the Abirame did want information after all, and when realizing he wouldn't get anything from just observing, went directly to the source. Minato smirked lightly. I felt their chakra. I have always been highly sensitive to it, and they weren't trying too hard to hide. To me they were like beacons, always being since he returned here and had to explain his knowledge of chakra. I see. They didn't say more. Not that they had time, and Minato had never been able to have long conversations with any Abirame. They weren't sociable enough. He was sure they communicated with their bugs, so maybe they were kept occupied through them. Gaara had talked to the Ichibi, and even if it was a difference there, he had kept a part of his mind constantly on the demon. The Abirame might do something similar with their bugs. It was worth looking into, when he got to know one of them well enough to ask. The teacher, a fat guy Minato first thought belonged to the Akimichi clan but then was told just was fat, appeared behind the desk and started the annual graduation speech. Minato mentally made a note to tell Kushina about this so she could prepare and bring something to elude boredom. She was a lot like he had been when he was young, constantly full of energy, and not liking to listen to useless talk. When he started on the teams, the usual outbursts of approval of dissatisfaction roamed the room between the announcements. The Abirame was teamed up with an Uchiha girl, Mikoto, and a civilian-born boy. Minato couldn't remember him from the future, so odds were he had died during the war. Then again, there were lots of ninja in Konoha. It was like Kakashi once had told them. There were one kage in each of the major villages, hundreds of chunin, fewer jonin but still many and thousands of genin. Okay, maybe not thousands, but there were certainly more of them than any others. As one person he couldn't possibly know everyone personally. The girl reminded him of Sasuke, but he was reminded of him each time he saw any of the Uchiha clan, so he didn't find it strange at all. What he was curious about was their interaction. The Aburama had nodded once to each of his teammates, then remained still and silent as usual. Mikoto had smiled and given him a wave, before turning and doing the same to the other boy. That boy, however, looked absolutely gobsmacked at the Abirame. Minato knew what he was thinking. When did he join our class? He was worried, however, when his name wasn't mentioned. That should have told him something was happening, but thought nothing of it when the teacher motioned for him to remain in the classroom. The rest of the class was released for lunch, and so Minato found himself alone with the teacher. The man looked mildly unsure of what to say, and started several times to say something before breaking off and swearing under his breath. In the end he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I'm not sure how to out this, Minato. You are currently the youngest person to ever graduate from the academy, since it was built. You are also probably one of the best students we've had. That has caused some concern among the ranks. Seeing as you are so young, Hokage, Sama decided to place you with a tutor of your own and not on a team after consulting his advisors. You'll be picked up with the others, and you'll have the normal genin duties, just not with a team. Minato frowned. Typical. Those doodling old coots. Couldn't they have left him alone, and how much of this was out of any real concern for him and how much was politics? He wasn't stupid. He knew he had attracted attention from numerous people. Some were no concern of his, while others he wasn't sure what he'd do if Orochimaru decided he'd be nice to use as an experiment a few years down the road, or if, God forbid, Ganza should try to recruit him. Well, all he could do was sit back and wait for the pervert to pick him up. He'd know in good time what games were in play here. The genin filed in and Minato noticed that many of them were grouping themselves in their teams. Not for the first time he wondered whether or not the whole lunch after announcing the teams thing was intentional to let the genin get used to their teams. It had some merit to it. Slowly, the room also filled with Jonin instructors, and Minato entertained himself by studying him. Just behind the teacher's desk, by the blackboard, stood a woman with a strange hair color between red and orange. She had a blue outfit on, reminding him of the outfit he remembered Ino used. By her side stood a man from the Hyuga clan. His white eyes denoted his heritage. He had similar loose outfit as all Hyuga Minato had seen, and he had to wonder if they were exhibitionists at heart. Their loose shirts always seemed to show off more than necessary. In a corner stood an Uchiha. His eyes were closed, and he wore a standard Jonin outfit, with a vest and all, but with the Uchiha fan on his left shoulder and a butterfly, of all things, on his right. He had his hair in a high ponytail, which was as long as any Yamanaka's. Beside him stood another man, this one with a large gray cloak and a stern expression on his face, and a woman with a long staff. Minato had no idea what the staff was for, but the laughter dancing in her eyes as she looked at some of the genin told him he might not want to know. She reminded him a little of how Mitarashi Enko could smile when she sensed a new subject of interest. Eventually Shibi's team left with her, and one by one the instructors indicated or told their teams to follow them. In the end, it was just him and the Uchiha left. With nothing else to do, he kept his eyes on the man and wondered when his teacher was supposed to get there. Having dealt with one tardy-prone sensei was enough, and if Jiraiya proved to do the same in this time he was going to seriously hurt him, even if it was more likely that the man was peeping at the hot springs. "Aren't you a silent one?" the man said at long last. Minato eyed him for a moment, and tilted his head to the side. "Who are you?" he asked, and the man grinned bemusedly. "Uchiha Yoshino. Your new sensei." Minato stared at him with large eyes. Oh fuck no, this wasn't happening. Where the hell was Jiraiya and what the hell was going on? And why was he constantly stuck with the thrice-damned clan? Was it some sort of divine punishment? Had he done something to piss off the higher powers? If so, he was regretting whatever offense he had committed. He stared at the Uchiha and absently noted a few details he had missed earlier. The man was young, probably his early 20s, like most ninja taking on a genin team, or in this case, a student. He had the telltale onyx eyes and dark brown hair of his clan, and a barely visible scar at his left cheek. It looked as if someone had pressed the tip of a kunai into his cheek and made an almost diamond-shaped wound. He was leaning against the wall with a detached air to him, staring back with one eyebrow raised and waiting for a reaction from the blonde boy. "I thought all Uchiha are police officers," Minato blurted out, conveniently forgetting the Chunin who had carried him when they arrived in Konoha. The man, Yoshino, he said his name was, scoffed. "That's what people like to believe. Konoha doesn't need a police force that huge, so the rest of us hold ranks within the ordinary force," he explained and pushed himself from the wall. "I need a smoke, so mind if we take this outside? The teachers get twitchy when someone tries to smoke in here. Claims we are a bad influence. Personally, I don't see what the problem is. We are training little children to become killers, and they still worry about having a bad influence on you." He beckoned Minato to follow, and he did, slightly taken back by the attitude. He wasn't sure what to make of the unknown Uchiha, but he didn't seem bad. He seemed more or less laid back. You really are a quiet one. I would have thought you wanted to know more than what my clan do?" he asked, and Minato saw him glance at him. As soon as they were out of the doors, the Uchiha pulled a pack of cigarettes from his pocket and lit one. He let out a sigh when he took a drag and looked up to the sky. Minato thought he looked somewhat at peace like that. "That's not healthy," he commented, gaining a laugh from the man. "Sure it isn't, brat, but I don't think I'll live long enough for it to be an issue. Besides, almost every accomplished ninja has some sort of habit. Seeing some of the more eccentric ones, I prefer my nicotine any day." Minato figured he had a point. He knew very well some of the more extreme quirks ninja could develop. He was silently relieved there was no guy in this time, or he was sure to be the chosen genius to challenge. Smoking wasn't really that bad. It didn't annoy the hell out of everyone around, at least unless it was someone with extreme aversion to tobacco. It didn't cause people to look weirdly at him, he didn't get pummeled by angry females for peeping, and he didn't fall into a drunken sleep at work. All in all, it was pretty harmless to anyone but the user. "I like sweets," he admitted freely and sat down at a bench beside the street they were walking down. He thought about it for a moment, and regarded his new sensei. The man seemed to be regarding him in turn. "Like or addicted to sugar?" Yoshino asked thoughtfully. Minato widened his eyes for a moment, but it was enough for the seasoned jonin to see. He snorted. "Surprised? You have awoken the interest of a lot of people. You're a genius of the ninja arts, and in a village like ours that counts for something. You've been kept an eye on since you were only a few months into your academy career. Your file says you sleep about 5 hours each night, goes training for an absurd amount of hours every day, and compensates by taking small naps during the day and eat an equally absurd amount of sweets." Minato frowned before he nodded. As much as he disliked it, it made sense that they had observed him. "That is why they have given me an Uchiha sensei," he mumbled to himself, but the man heard him and nodded. "Yes. By they I take it you know who assigned the teams. The Uchiha clan has a history of producing young but excellent ninja, so they figured we could train someone without the Sharingan equally well, considering your aptitude for the ninja arts. Minato hummed at that information, and while he wasn't pleased by constantly getting involved in a clan he'd rather have nothing to do with, it was a coincidence. Something else struck him though, something more irritating. Without knowing it, he had already become a piece in the political game inside the village. What do they want with me? He asked with narrowed eyes. He couldn't believe they did this without expecting some sort of result from it. He doubted the advisors, and the Hokage wanted him to have tight bonds with the one clan they never fully trusted in the village. So what was their game? What did they want to achieve by assigning him one of them as a sensei? The Uchiha's smile widened. My, you truly are a sharp kid. Most wouldn't have seen the politics in this, but for now it is just like I said. You have potential to be one of the greatest ninja from Konoha of all time, but the only ones with experience of training children as young as you is my clan. By handing you over to me, they are ensuring your training and making a show of trusting us. Minato leaned back and pulled a stick of Pocky from his pocket at the same time as Yoshino lit another cigarette. They remained silent for a while, enjoying their respective addictions, before Minato raised another question. Why are you telling me this? According to the profile I was given, you are too smart for your own good. If I didn't come out and tell you, you wouldn't trust me until I did. Eventually you would have found out on your own, and mistrusted me even more. That is hardly productive when I am supposed to teach you. I understand, but aren't your clan involved in this as much as the other higher-ups? And why the Uchiha clan? It might as well have been the Hyuga clan. Yoshino blew out a cloud of smoke and watched it disappear into the air with a far-off expression. Probably to the first of your questions at least. Personally, I couldn't care less. It is for the clan elders and the head of the clan to plot political games. As for why the Uchiha clan, well, like I said, we know how to handle cases like yours. And while the Hyugas often produce prodigal ninja too, they are all centered on their own special way of fighting. Without the Byakugan shitload of help that would be. Minato had a feeling there was something the man wasn't saying, but he didn't press it. So far the man had been open and answered honestly enough, and he didn't want to get on his bad side. Though, he could tell his new sensei had decent respect for the Hyuga clan. He had always imagined the two clans of arrogant jerks to get along like two packs of rivaling wolves would, but that didn't seem to be the case. Perhaps it was because both held a bloodline limit affecting their eyes, and that caused some mutual respect. So what are we going to do now? Minato asked and looked at this Yoshino sensei and wondered just how he was supposed to be tested to pass the actual exam. The man smirked. It was a smirk he had seen when Kakashi had tested them as well. How proficient are you with fire techniques? Yoshino asked and flicked the rest of his cigarette somewhere out of sight. Minato wasn't sure if he should berate him for it, or just ignore it. He had a feeling this guy was like the other Uchiha he had known in that he could be irritating without even trying. I know a couple, he answered and got up from the bench. The Uchiha's smile widened into a grin. Great. We'll head over to one of the training grounds around the compound, and you'll show me the ones you know. If you pass my standards, I'll take you on as my student. If not, you'll have to spend another year in the academy. Minato vaguely remembered having heard that every jonin taking on a team had their own way of testing their potential students. It made sense that the Uchiha's test would be to do a decent fire technique. From what he had heard from Sasuke, to master AC, rank or higher fire technique was a rite of passage within the clan. Upon mastering it, they would no longer be considered children but full members of the clan and ninja in their own right, even if they hadn't yet passed the academy. It irked him slightly that he had to be measured to the standards of a clan who were all predisposed to fire, when the test happened to be to do a fire technique. It wasn't exactly fair, but then again, little in the life of a ninja was. Yoshino led him to a secluded training area outside of the Uchiha compound. There was a small lake, and Minato concluded that was why they were there. Fire tended to burn things, unless those things were wet, and could cause major destruction if it got out of hand. The man stopped at the shore and stood a moment, and just tilted his head to the side before frowning at the opposite bank. Minato could tell why he was frowning. There were several chakra signatures there, partly masked, but still enough for him to sense. It appeared as if the clan was more interested than he had thought. He shrugged and smirked with a small gleam of mischief in his eyes. He made the correct set of seals and breathed out, putting as much chakra as needed in the technique to make it large enough to be impressive. The stream of hot chakra erupted into a large fireball, heading for the shore where he felt the chakra. Yoshino had a large grin on his face, his eyes filled with mirth as the fireball flew harmlessly over the water and came dangerously close to the shore before it was gone. Good, really good, he muttered, and Minato felt his eyes on him again, this time in contemplation. You said you knew a couple? What is the other one? Yoshino asked and eyed him as if he was an especially interesting species he hadn't seen before. Minato could see him study him with those dark eyes and felt as if it was all the man could do not to stalk around him in circles like a predator, to watch him from every direction. Like an overly zealous cat. The mental image made him smile. Not wanting the man to know what he thought of him, he instead made the hand seals and blew out several smaller fireballs over the water. Fire release, Phoenix Immortal technique, Yoshino mumbled with satisfaction and glittering eyes. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, he continued, staring at the blonde with unnerving, unblinking eyes. Minato stared back, face blank and a silent plea to the gods for his sensei not to be mentally retarded. He felt he had dealt with enough disturbed people during his past lifetime and didn't feel like trying to set another one on the straight and narrow. This one had seemed so normal too. I don't know how to hide shurikens in them yet, he said, and tried to force himself to appear calm and collected. The Uchiha smiled, this time wide and unguarded. Great, that will be some of the first we'll work on then. Do you prefer shuriken over kunai? Close, mid-ranged or long-distant battle? Yoshino asked and fell back on the ground and let out another content sigh. Minato sat down beside him and had to admit it felt pretty good just sitting there and watch the sun reflect on the water. I don't have preference for either of them, but I tend to avoid close combat. I am too small to do any real damage with taijutsu if my opponent is grown up or at least a few years over the normal graduation age, so I have to make it count if I get up close and personal. That's why I usually work with genjutsu, and if that won't work, shuriken and mid to long range ninjutsu. Yeah, I was told about the stunt you pulled at the exam. Something like that could probably kill if you hit the right spot, or maim an opponent seriously. Do you know what your elemental affinity is yet? Minato looked at him from the corner of his eyes. Was he really going to explain that sort of thing to him this early? He started to wonder if the man already had something in mind with all the questions he asked. No, we aren't tested for that at the academy. Then again, I am not even supposed to know what that is. The Uchiha chuckled and folded his arms behind his head to get a more comfortable position. You aren't, but it isn't stopping you from knowing about it, is it? I have a theory, you see, but I don't know if it is right. They say our affinity is something we are born with, but I think if we start early enough you can develop a secondary affinity almost as strong as your primary affinity. Many in my clan have fire as a secondary affinity and not a primary affinity, but it is there. We start training with fire techniques really early, considering it is our rite of passage. I am thinking you might have done the same, by training with elemental techniques as young as you are. He was silent for a moment, before he turned slightly to look at his new student. That is, if fire wasn't your affinity to begin with, lots of people in Konoha have that as their primary affinity. Not surprising, I guess, since we live in fire country. Minato hummed and leaned back on his hands looking up at the blue sky. He wondered if his affinity was still wind. He had become rather fond of the unpredictable element. It was even more so than fire, as unstable as fire could be. Wind was always shifting, always changing from the mild breeze to the fierce storms and everything in between. I am not from fire country. I was born in Whirlpool. Isn't that in my file as well? The Uchiha blinked before he smirked. I forgot it was. I never met many of the Whirlpool ninja. I heard they were more into trade than the traditional ninja arts. Most of them were said to be damn good guards of caravans and ships. I heard rumors claiming that was part of why the water country wanted them out of the way. It has never been verified, but it is said that some of the water country supplies or even leads some of the pirates along their coast. Minato let his eyes drop from the sky to Yoshino and gave him a thoughtful look. I never knew that. My mother never told me much about what went on around us. I think she tried to protect me in her own way, and I never knew my father. There, that should help him explain any and all ignorance of his origin. I never did either. My sister is a few years older than me, though, so she has a few memories of our father. Minato heard the fondness in his voice and smiled a small smile of his own. Yeah, I have the Uzumaki cousins. I consider them my family now, like a very annoying sister, an adoring younger brother and a bit of a reclusive older brother, he said and chuckled as he imagined the affronted looks he'd get if they ever heard him describe them like that. Yoshino glanced over at him and nodded with a smirk. I am going to be an uncle in half a year or so. In fact, my sister said she is going to make me his or her godfather. Minato raised an eyebrow at that tidbit of information. The man was really trying to get to know him, and in turn he opened up for him to see some of who and what he was. And even trade, Minato thought, intrigued. It certainly was more than Kakashi had given out. He had preferred for them to get to know him by themselves. Perhaps because he felt his past was better left buried and forgotten. Minato wasn't sure, but if he could, he'd see what he could do about it. Guy sure had droned on and on about his departed and dearly missed eternal rival when he got in the mood. If Minato was lucky, he could make it so the latter never discovered the youthfulness of green spandex. A brief glimpse of a man in orange spandex in his mind's eye made him shudder. While the color was better, well, spandex was out, period. The word godfather reminded him of Jiraiya. He hadn't actually known that before he had read the large book with all of Jiraiya's collected observations. He had learned a lot of how the nature worked from that, and gained some useful or just personally satisfying information. He found it weird his father wasn't mentioned to be his father in the text, but he guessed Jiraiya had meant for him to read the book and didn't want to give away too much information. He tended to be like that. Just give enough information to make you think and then wait for you to come to your own conclusions. Quibi had revealed the grand secret before he had time to consider it, and just because the demon never tried to sugarcoat anything, he trusted it to be true. So what will you teach me? He asked and directed his attention to his sensei. The Uchiha was still relaxing in the grass, but Minato wasn't fooled. If anything or anyone was to come unexpected on them, the Jonin would be up and ready in less than a second. I've been thinking. We'll definitely work on your taijutsu and endurance. Even if it will be useless in battle for a few years to come, you'll be able to use it against people your own age and a little older, and bandits. The sort of scum most likely to appear on missions we'll take when the time is right. Other than that, I have an idea. What do you know about chakra manipulation beside the elemental manipulation? Minato wondered if Yoshino had an idea which would lead him to start training to form the Rasengan, but shrugged in response. I know it is possible to do shape manipulation, but I don't know how. Have you heard of the Sans Puppeteer Corps? It is a group of ninja from Suna who uses puppets to fight. They control those puppets with strings made of chakra. Minato couldn't see what that had to do with anything, but didn't comment. He waited for his sensei to explain what he was thinking, and was a bit worried when he saw the grin forming. Every day from now on, when we have finished the physical training, we'll work on your chakra manipulation until you can form perfect chakra strings. Sensei, I don't mean to sound ungrateful, but I don't want to be a puppeteer, he said carefully. Uchiha Yoshino smirked with a pleased look to him. I don't want you to be one either. You see, it'll be a shame to let your chakra control go to waste, and good chakra control is something which can't be copied. I want you to surpass the Uchiha clan, and to do that you'll need a technique we can't copy. Yes, we'll see how it is done, but our ability to use the information will be restricted by our own chakra control. To say Minato was shocked was an understatement. He was utterly speechless and left with nothing but confusion. Yoshino stretched on the ground and watched him with a neutral expression. I don't want to train a great ninja. I want to train an exceptional ninja. I want you to surpass me, to surpass the clan I am bound by and become a legacy overshadowing even the Uchiha clan. If you can't do it, you'll forever be marked as the genius trained by the Uchiha clan, but if you can rise above us, above any label the word bestowed upon you, you'll shine in your own right. The man laughed lightly. I'll admit it is selfish reasons, but all the same it is my reason. What is your reason, Minato, to want to walk this path in life? To want to willingly soak your hands in blood, sell your soul for your village and kill your heart for your sanity? Minato was honestly taken back by the abrupt frankness. None of his previous teachers had ever given him a speech like that. True, Kakashi had warned them of the consequences and where the heroes ended up, but he still hadn't tried to truly explain. He hadn't told them right out to what they would have to do to survive as a ninja. That was something they had discovered on their own. I saw my friends killed, my family killed, my world ended in red. I hate that color, I despise it, but I am bound by it. I swore I would live, I would thrive, and I wouldn't let their lives be in vain. I will fight to my dying breath for my new home, so that too won't be red and gone. Yoshino looked him in the eyes, and a glimmer of respect flickered in those dark eyes. Minato might be a child, but he didn't have the mind of a child, and his new sensei understood that. He would teach this strange boy to be a true ninja of Konoha, to stand tall when the world wanted to drag him down, and to live with the unyielding will and power ninja of Fire Country were raised to be a part of. Minato knew in that moment that he would forever be entangled with the Uchiha clan. His new sensei wasn't about to let him go. He was going to surpass the clan with the feared bloodline limit and shine on his own. He didn't want to be shadowed by anyone or anything, be it a clan or a teacher. That is a nice goal. To live for those who have passed. You have seen death already, and come to terms with that. It makes things easier for us. We'll train for the next months, and then we'll start doing missions. I want you to have firm grip on the chakra manipulations I am thinking of before we take any higher-ranking missions. Minato was fully aware what kind of missions they would be doing to begin with. He had not missed those, but on the upside the dreaded Tora the cat couldn't be born yet and the fire daimyo's wife had to be young at this time. She had been in her 50s when he was a genin last time, so about 20 now. Right, and remember Minato, I won't go easy on you. Your actions will reflect on the Uchiha clan since I am your sensei, and as much as it irritates me at times, I won't let anyone shame my clan. Minato looked severely at him and nodded once. And I won't shame the village, he said truthfully. He looked up at the blue sky and wondered if this was how every prodigy was treated, as a pawn to the opposing powers of Konoha. A tool and a weapon, not only in battle but in games played behind closed doors and shrouded in darkness. Minato watched with interest as the sister of his heart, and mother in another life, pummeled Inoichi in a spar. The man was great with his clan's techniques. His observation skills were practically unsurpassed by anyone Minato had met bar the ever-stoic Uchiha Itachi, and he had the workings of a true interrogator and information gatherer, but a taijutsu expert he was not. Kushina, on the other hand, was mostly oblivious, much like he had been before he was forced to gather information or die trying, but she had a mean right hook and a bone-breaking kick. He tilted his head to the side as Inoichi stumbled up and waved his hands in surrender. Kushina grinned widely in victory and whirled around to face Minato, who was sitting in the shade and eating strawberry-flavored Pocky. See that? I smashed the pretty boy! She exclaimed exuberantly, and Minato smirked as he saw Inoichi's fingers twitch. If she wasn't careful, she'd find her body doing very embarrassing things soon. Instead of answering, he tilted his head and suppressed another smirk as thunderclouds gathered over her head. Aren't you going to say something? She demanded, and Inoichi shook his head in exasperation. Minato enjoyed baiting her, but she didn't seem to understand that. You still have a bad balance, Minato said when he had finished chewing. Inoichi couldn't help the small snicker escaping him when Kushina gawked at Minato as if he had just revealed the most well-protected secret in all of the elemental countries. Minato had, of course, told her that before, and promised to keep her weakness a secret, but seeing as she didn't do anything to correct it, he decided it was time to reveal it. You said you'd keep it a secret? Kushina accused angrily, and Minato gazed at her with blank eyes. I said I would keep it a secret if you tried to correct it. You haven't, so I am telling. If Inoichi was an enemy and a little more experienced, he could have exploited it, and won, even with the same skills as Inoichi currently has. He took another bite and watched as the red-headed girl and the blonde pretty boy thought about it. Inoichi let out a sigh. Yeah, well, I am terrible at this. Do you know what I can do to improve my taijutsu? Minato was about to say no, but kept his tongue. Had the Inoichi he knew been better at taijutsu than this boy was? Certainly, but he had decades of experience to fall back on. Though, to live that long he would have had to survive his genin days. He rubbed the back of his head and smiled sheepishly. You know, Inoichi, perhaps you should try to be more underhanded. Brute force and direct attacks don't seem to be your thing. You aren't as strong as most others our age, but you are fast, so you could use that to your advantage. You'll just have to learn to execute the forms faster. To advise someone on these things was something he would never get used to. On techniques and forms and knowledge it was fine, but to advise someone on how to make it work for them was new, and just because he knew the stuff didn't mean he could say, do this and that and it'll work out wonderfully. Inoichi, on the other hand, seemed to find this reasonable and nodded in agreement. Kushina grumbled something about boys scheming together, but Minato gave her a long, hard stare. I've already told you how to fix your balance, and you still won't do it, so don't be so snarky. If you don't want him to win your next spar, you could just do what I told you. Everyone can't act like cats like you do. Have you ever not landed perfectly? Kushina said and rolled her eyes at him. Minato shook his head dismissively. Of course. It isn't as if I miraculously woke up with the balance of a shinobi, he answered grudgingly. He didn't like to be reminded of his current training regime, since it was tough. Tough meaning he hardly had time to do anything else. Yoshino sensei had said he wouldn't go easy on him, and he had meant it. It had taken him 2 whole months to produce chakra strings the Uchiha accepted as passing, and they were so thin they were damn near invisible. Up to that point Minato hadn't known why he was learning how to do this, other than that it could be useful in some situations and honed his chakra control, but Yoshino did have a plan. A rather sinister one. Chakra extending from a ninja's body was like an extension of their senses. A ninja in control of his or her chakra would always sense where that chakra was if it was in some way connected to them. They couldn't listen to or see what was going on around the pure chakra extending from and connected their body, but they knew where it was, and that was why Yoshino wanted his student to know the trick. It was a common trick to use wires attached to shurikens to manipulate them, but only the Uchiha with their Sharingan could truly use that to its full extent, since only the Sharingan could keep up with the speed of the thrown weapons. Minato had attached his chakra strings to the shurikens, and no matter how fast they spun, he always knew where they were and could manipulate their directions in the air. The chakra strings attached to them worked mostly like wire would, possibly capture an opponent if that was the objective. Minato had had the great privilege of testing it out on a victim. The fire daimyo's wife wasn't his wife yet, simply his fiancée, which was where the problem of Tora the cat began. The man had no idea what he started when he bound the ring to a small kitten with a red ribbon and handed it to his chosen bride. It wasn't the same cat, thank God, or Minato would have killed the unnatural creature, but it had to be a relative. It acted in the exact same way, and so the legend of the undying demon cat and bane of all Konoha genin was born. While that had little to do with Yoshino's idea, elemental manipulation had everything to do with it. He wanted, and that was where Minato was at this point, Minato to change the normal chakra in the chakra strings with elemental chakra. Any enemy caught in a trap like that would most likely suffer some extensive damage. The ordinary chakra strings couldn't do much but steer the shurikens and capture an enemy, but elemental chakra strings was something else entirely, and the extensive training had begun. Minato had hardly been doing anything but eat, sleep a few hours and go through the whole wind element training again for what felt like months now. It actually was, but he didn't like to admit that, and yesterday he had finally gotten a break trough. He had cut the waterfall. He had found himself relieved when the chakra paper had split in two before it burned. It had proven Yoshino's theory to some extent, but to Minato it was more important to know he had the same affinity as before. It made him wonder if it had been his father's affinity too, or if it was something he had changed when he arrived in this body. It had taken him longer, naturally, to master the affinity this time around, even if he knew what to do, but it was to be expected. He couldn't produce hundreds, or at least tens of shadow clones to help him out. Not that he needed to figure out how to do it, he just needed his body to act along his thoughts. Of course, Yoshino and everyone else were impressed with how little time he used to figure it out. He was frustrated with how long it took. Yoshino had laughed it off as the impatience all children have when they are trying to accomplish something. His success with the wind manipulation was his reason for watching Inoichi and Kushina spar. Yoshino had given him few days off. According to him, it was to relax. Personally, Minato thought it had more to do with his sister, Akane, staying at the hospital awaiting the labor. He didn't say that, however, and was happy with a few days to do with as he pleased. He wanted to learn a new technique, and as fun as it had been to constantly work on his chakra manipulation, in one form or another, he still preferred to learn techniques. Yoshino had told him about one and given him the hand seals needed, in case Minato got bored and wanted something to do. It was another C-rank genjutsu he remembered falling for once, the sly mind effect technique. It caused the victim to wander around, believing she or they were heading for their intended destination, while in reality walking around in circles. He was tempted to try it out on his unsuspecting friends, but he needed to try it out a few times more before attempting it on another human. Yoshino was a strange person, Minato mused. His sensei could be smiling and lazing about 1 minute, and the next was all work and no nonsense. He could smoke and watch the sky with a far-off expression, and then turn around and ask him to attack him with everything he got. Minato had a feeling the frequent times he was spacing out was the real reason the Jonin was taking on a student instead of taking higher-ranking missions. He never asked what Yoshino saw in the blue sky, or why he always turned to watch it when he went off to wherever his mind was, and in turn Yoshino never asked him why he wanted to train every hour of the day. They always had lunch with Yoshino's sister, who scolded him for pushing a young child too much and too far too early. When she had done that and was satisfied with his properly chastised expression, she would tell Minato he had to eat, and he had to tell his sensei off when he got tired. Her brother had no sense whatsoever and tended to be absolutely reckless, in her mind, and she would not be happy with them if Minato needed to be hospitalized after training with her brother. She was a very consuming woman, but Yoshino didn't seem to mind. He smiled and agreed with her, and only spoke against her tirades when she started to repeat herself. Minato liked them, they were nice people, and not at all as he imagined they would be. They were normal, actually. Well, as normal as ninja could be, and treated him like an extension of their family. He knew their neighbors and had had dinner with their elderly mother. He was told their parents had been quite old when they decided to have children, and their father had died during some skirmish when Yoshino was a few months old. The mother, she was old enough to remember the Shodame and Naidame Hokage, and even Madara, and told the most interesting stories from the first great ninja war. She had fought in that, and had been a child during the founding of Konoha. Minato learned a lot he hadn't previously known about both the Senju clan and the Uchiha clan. He was pretty sure they both had plenty of skeletons in their closets, but refused to take sides. According to her, Madara had had a brother who he killed for reasons the clan kept a secret, but that was what led him to eventually fight Senju Hashirama in the Valley of the End. The clan spoke against his ways and forsworn his dreams of grandeur. Their reasons to ally with the Senju clan had been to stop the bloodshed, not to find reasons for more, but the Senju and to some extent to other clans were hard-pressed to believe that, and the tension between them had started. Minato couldn't see what the problem was, until he remembered that the third Hokage had been the star pupil of both the Shodame and the Naidame. Both his mentors had distrusted the Uchiha clan, so it was natural for him and his advisors to be wary around them as well. The Uchiha, on the other hand, had just let the problem stay the way it was and didn't try to act on it one way or another. It was a sort of standstill. He refocused on Kushina, who had been talking about her useless kunoichi class. Apparently girls had specialized classes for their entire extracurriculum as kunoichi. From what Kushina said, it sounded as if it was boring, tedious, and utterly meaningless. He sighed. She was most likely overly dramatic in her descriptions. There had to be some merit to it, or the academy wouldn't have it in their curriculum. And we have to do a tea ceremony. I mean, how am I going to train to do that? Tsum has a dozen cousins she can badger into have mock tea parties with her, even if it is pointless, but I don't. And why do we have to do something so? Kushina, you'll give me a headache, Minato said resigned. We can arrange to have a tea ceremony at my place, if you want to, and we'll invite Inoichi and his parents to come too, and maybe Sensei will come if I asked him. Carol would think it funny anyway. That way you get to try it out and maybe Mrs. Yamanaka would give you some guidance? He wasn't keen on the idea himself. He really didn't have the time. His sensei was harsh with him, but when he lived up to his expectations he would reward him with either a technique, or teach him new ways of using some he already knew. Yoshino had showed him just why the Uchiha clan was a feared one, no matter who the individual you were facing was. They really were amazing ninja, there was no denying that. Inoichi palmed his face. You just have to go and give my mum a chance to dress us up formally, don't you? She is still saying how she wished she'd gotten a girl, so she could do all these things with her. She'll love to help out, I promise you that. Minato turned to him, in hopes of getting one less problem on his shoulders, however small it might be. Would you ask her for me, please? Or do you think we should write invitations? He had no idea how one did these things, aside from what he had picked up here and there. When Yoshino's mother had invited him to dine with her and her children, she had given him a written invitation, even when Yoshino could have simply asked him to come. Maybe it was better if they did that, it seemed more formal. Though, Kushina was rarely one for formalities. Inoichi looked at him oddly too. I swear you spend too much time with that uptight clan, he muttered and shook his head, but his voice was amused. Minato let out a small sigh. Will you ask her then? He pressed and rose. He had a technique to learn and the day didn't get any younger. Inoichi waved disarmingly. Yeah, no need for the sour expression, you know, he huffed and Minato dipped his head. He wasn't in the best of moods when he had to look after Kushina and Kero as well. They were only children, after all, and they needed someone to help them out when Kanuto wasn't around. He was a well-liked guy and an efficient shinobi, making him easy to get along with and a sought-after team member. Sufficient to say he was often chosen as a member of a team when a team leader got to choose his or her members. This left Minato to look after the two youngest Uzumaki cousins, even if he, in the eyes of everyone else, was a year younger than Kushina. Since he actually felt years older than her, he took it on himself to keep an eye on his mother in a past life. Sorry. I got something I've got to do, and you guys should be back at the academy in 5 minutes. The break is over, he reminded them and saw their dawning horror. They sometimes had lunch with him outside of the academy if he, by some miracle, wasn't training or doing the standard boring D-ranked missions all genin were assigned. They usually ended up in the fields behind the academy, and they always ran late. Minato watched them as Kushina wide-eyed dragged a lightly ruffled Inoichi with her by his hand. The blonde wondered if his friend might gain a dislodged shoulder from the abrupt departure. See you later, Kushina called, and he didn't doubt he would. She'd come barreling into his apartment that evening with her homework, Kero silently patting after her with a resigned look in his eyes, pop down their books on his kitchen table and do their assignment there, even if they didn't need his help. They just wanted the company, and it was fine with him. He welcomed it, actually, and he didn't mind doze off with them around. It was when they left he would dream, and wake up silently swearing he wouldn't let Konoha be destroyed a second time, come hell and high water. Shaking his head to get rid of the thoughts, he wandered off to get somewhere further away from the academy and the possibilities of someone getting accidentally caught in his techniques, and set to work. It was another 5 days before he saw Kushina again. Kanuto came back home and occupied both his cousins' time. Minato thought they were happy to have him back for a while. They certainly were loud enough next door. He didn't drop by, even when he knew they would be welcoming him. He didn't spend much time in his apartment at all, but was mostly to find on a training ground, or with Inoichi. Yoshino had given him his strangest training regime to date, and he needed the Yamanaka's knowledge of flowers to do it. The Uchiha wanted him to study butterflies. He had already studied cats. That was after Yoshino found his balance and awareness lacking. Minato was told to observe cats and learn from them. Nothing else, not even what to learn from them, but figured it out when he started to understand them. They were very graceful animals, not at all like dogs, and more importantly foxes. Canine animals didn't have the same elegance to them, or the same sharp eyes regarding everything around them. They didn't have the same silent paws or the same sneaky way of approaching a prey. A fox would pounce on its prey from up close, a pack of wolves run it down and latch themselves on it, a dog would act much the same way, hyenas were scavengers that held no grace whatsoever, but cats were silent hunters and they were always sneaky when approaching their chosen prey. As much as he could understand why he had spent the better part of 2 weeks doing nothing but following cats around, he still didn't understand what butterflies had to do with anything. He knew his sensei had a butterfly embroidered on the shoulder of all his shirts, but he didn't know why. He had asked once, and the blank look he got in return was enough to keep him from asking again. He wondered if Yoshino was planning on telling him, since he set him to study butterflies, but he didn't have to like it. At the moment he was seated in the backyard of the Yamanaka residence, staring at a bush with several sharp orange butterflies fluttering over it. The name of the species was Julia, but apart from the strong color he didn't see anything special about it. It was a butterfly, pretty and calm, but useless for a ninja. Minato groaned and huffed exasperated. It was a complete waste of time. He'd been sitting like this for hours, ever since Inoichi left for the academy, and now it was past lunchtime. He still was no closer to understand why he was watching butterflies. Mr. Yamanaka had been watching him for a while too, and heard his huff of aggravation. You know, the butterfly Yoshino-san has on his shirt is a butterfly called Morning Cloak, he said thoughtfully, and Minato turned quickly to look at him. Why does it have such a name? He asked the man, and the older Yamanaka smiled bittersweetly. Why indeed? A butterfly is beautiful, don't you think? The colors and the silky wings make them beautiful to us, but they die quickly, just like a human may do. They are a symbol of how quickly our happiness may disappear, just like beauty it is quick to fade. Minato looked back at the butterflies, but this time he wondered if that was why his sensei had asked him to study them. To understand that everything, even happiness, was something fleeting and indefinable. He rose silently and thanked Mr. Yamanaka before he left the garden. He had a teacher to hunt down. Yoshino was, for all it was worth, more observant of him than any sensei he had previously had. Considering that they had consisted of someone intent on reading a pornographic book, the other writing said books and the last being a toad, that didn't say much. On the other hand, if he didn't want to be found he was close to impossible to find. He could spend days doing nothing but hover over Minato's shoulders, and then suddenly disappear for several days without any kind of explanation. This time, however, Minato knew where to find him. Konoha Hospital hadn't changed much over the years, or rather, it wouldn't change much over the years. It was the same large white building with a park surrounding it. Flowing white curtains in the windows and complaining ninja in the hallways. Nurses were patiently trying to explain just why their wounds or other injuries were severe enough to warrant a stay in the most dreaded building in Konoha. It was weird, really, how even the most seasoned ninja would cower in front of the hospital and come up with the craziest reason as to why they didn't need to go there, even when they were about to faint from blood loss. The echoes of "he's missing again, and when the hell did he get away?" told him that it was the same whatever time they were in. Minato snickered a little. He hadn't seen her yet, but he knew Tsunade was around somewhere, so the renegade patients would face the wrath of the one of the most renowned female ninja of all time after escaping. The fact that even her anger wasn't enough to keep the ninja in their beds was proof of their common dislike of being holed up in the building. Minato was fairly certain he would find his cryptic sensei here, probably keeping his sister company, and getting to know his new nephew. Akane had given birth to a healthy baby boy 2 days prior, and Yoshino wasted no time in letting everyone know. He was ridiculously happy with the little baby and said he was sure the tyke would grow up to be amazing. Minato wasn't sure what to say. All the child did when he visited yesterday was to sleep in his crib. He was pink, with a tuft of dark hair in his head, and with small-fisted hands. Really, Minato understood the importance of a new child and the hope everyone placed in the children, but the baby didn't seem any different to him. It was like all the other children in the ward, but at least the boy hadn't been wailing when Minato was there. He navigated the corridors to find the right room, knocked and entered. He was met with 4 identical set of obsidian eyes, and wondered not for the first time if the Uchiha had some sort of supreme eye gen which overruled any other eye color or shape. They were as good as identical, all of them. It was actually a better way to recognize them than the fan they bore on their clothes. It gave them away ASAP. Yoshino-sensei, Akane, good day, he greeted them before he tilted his head to look at the 2 others. Of course he recognized their older mother Cheyenne. The last person was unknown to him. It was a boy, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail at the nape of his neck, and a rather rigid stance. He looked stressed, but not more than a few years older than Minato. He tried to figure out where he had seen a similar face, but drew a blank and decided not to think about it. "How are you, Cheyenne-san?" he asked politely and closed the door behind him. The woman smiled brightly at him, while the boy gave him an appreciative look. Yoshino just smirked all-knowingly and didn't say anything. "Never better, child. I have finally gotten a grandchild, a little boy to spoil rotten and tell all my stories to." Minato nodded in agreement and walked over to the bed where Akane rested. She was propped against no less than 3 pillows and was holding her son with pure adoration on her face. "Have you decided how to name him?" Minato asked curiously and looked down into the face of the baby. His eyes were still baby blue, but he didn't doubt how they would look in a few weeks when they would change to the black of the Uchiha clan. Akane smiled at him. "I've decided. He'll be named Uchiha Obito, and one day he'll be a true ninja, don't you think?" Minato had never heard of anyone named Uchiha Obito, but he was only 8 when the clan was wiped off the face of the earth, so for all he knew there might have been a ninja named Uchiha Obito walking around Konoha. "The name is nice. How did you come up with that?" he asked curiously and reached out a finger for the baby to hold. The infant wrapped a hand around his finger in a surprisingly tight grip and didn't seem to be planning on letting him loose any time soon. He tugged slightly on his finger, but the baby kept his firm grip without letting up. It was Yoshino who answered after having snickered lightly. He quit fast enough, probably due to the venomous glare Akane sent him. "She's always liked that name. She named her doll Obito when we were children," Yoshino admitted, but then chuckled. "It is either that she likes the name a lot, or she didn't bother finding another one." "Yoshino, don't antagonize your sister," Cheyenne said softly from her chair, and Yoshino immediately shut up. He might be a powerful ninja and all, but when it came to the women in his family he was totally whipped. Perhaps that was why he was so exhilarated he'd gotten a nephew instead of a niece. He dipped his head instead and shifted his gaze to the sky outside, once again lost in whatever memory he pictured. Minato shook his head. Now he had to wait until he got back down to earth before he could get any answers. "Minato, I would like you to meet someone," Cheyenne said and nodded towards the boy at her side. Minato trotted over and waited for her to continue her introduction. "This is the great-grandson of my cousin, Uchiha Fugako. He is the heir of the clan," she explained, and Minato raised an eyebrow. This was Sasuke's father, he realized. He had to be, or Itachi wouldn't have been the clan heir. Unless this boy had a brother and died, the similarities between this boy and Itachi was too uncanny to be anything but that of father and son. "It is a pleasure to meet you," he said politely and smiled at the other boy. Fugako didn't answer at first, but seemed to assess him, or something, before he nodded and gave a small smile in return. "I have heard you are a decent shinobi," he said, and Minato blinked unbelievingly. Well, he wasn't sure he should take that as praise or an insult. For an 8-year-old genin he was damn good, and he knew it. If Fugako knew it or not, he didn't give any token of it. Behind them, Yoshino snorted, "Don't be cocky, Fugako. Minato could very well swipe the floor with you, even if you are 2 years older." Minato could see several emotions flicker in the dark eyes of the young Uchiha, and tilted his head a little. He wondered if he should prove his sensei's statement, or just let it slide. "I see Yoshino has trained you well then," Fugako settled on. Minato wanted to bang his head against something hard for a moment, or maybe try to bang Fugako's head against the wall would work better. He wondered what was worse, the Hyuga branch house with their obsession with fate, or the Uchiha with their obsession with their clan. Maybe obsession ran in the eye technique clans. He had only met one Rinnegan user, but he was obsessed with peace. So much so he was willing to destroy the world to obtain it. Cheyenne chuckled upon seeing Minato's chagrined expression. He was better at hiding his feelings now, but he still showed them when he got rattled enough, and Fugako managed to rattle his being to the core. "Minato is a very gifted boy, Fugako. You should know yourself how rarely individuals like him appear," she said soothingly, and Yoshino backed her up with a nod. "Which brings us up to this, why are you here, Minato? I thought you were studying butterflies." At this, Fugako gave his clansman a very confused look, but Yoshino didn't seem to notice, or he didn't care. Most likely the latter. Minato shrugged. "I figured out which butterfly you have on your shoulder, sensei," he said simply, and Yoshino frowned. He suddenly looked weary and a little wary. His eyes went to the sky, but only for a moment before he sighed. "I see. Then you should pack to leave the village for a week. We'll be leaving tomorrow morning." Minato couldn't help his surprise. He hadn't been outside of the village since he arrived when he was 5, unless he counted the training grounds, and had no idea what Yoshino was planning. That wasn't something new with his sensei. He hardly ever told what he was thinking or planning, but to leave the village was huge. Especially for a genin. He had done countless D-ranked missions already, so could it be? He gave Yoshino a sharp look, and the man smirked faintly. "So you figured it out on your own?" "Yes, we'll be doing C-ranked missions from now on. No more catching that infuriating cat or babysitting Mrs. Aiko's triplets." "Are you sure?" Minato asked, and was honestly curious what his sensei thought about his skills. The Uchiha hummed, and the faint, sad smile he had seen a few times before reappeared. "Sure, yeah, I am. You are an outstanding student, Minato. I told myself we'd do C-ranked missions once you found the name of my butterfly. All you have to do now is to understand," he said, and his voice was uncharacteristically grave. There was a hard glint in his eyes, one that wasn't softened by the usual mirth and laziness overshadowing the emotions he hid. Minato had a feeling he wouldn't like whatever it was Yoshino had planned for him. Fugako looked startled. He had graduated a year before Minato and was just now starting to take C-ranked missions with his team. That the blonde who was younger than him was ready to do them now either spoke of Yoshino's rashness or of Minato's skill. Minato couldn't help the small smile on his face. He was pretty sure nothing, absolutely nothing, was worse than the triplets. If there ever was something like a curse, it was having more than one baby at the time. He had helped out at the orphanage as well, at Yoshino's insistence, and he could honestly say it was the scariest thing he had done. Children were downright frightening, and the way they could easily manipulate the most hardened ninja with watery eyes and quivering lips were nothing short of impressive. He wasn't sure, but he thought it might have been Yoshino's way of giving him a lesson in precaution when indulging in certain acts, even if he was only 8 years old. "Meet me at the north gate at sunrise," Yoshino said, and with that he gave a brief smile to his sister and mother, completely ignoring the children, and left the room to do God only knew what. Minato glanced over at Akane, who shook her head gently. "Don't mind him. He's always ranting about how boring this village is. He'll be happy to get outside a little," she said happily, and Minato frowned inwardly. The way she said it, it sounded as if Yoshino wasn't allowed to leave the village just like that. Of course, no ninja was allowed to just leave, but they had some freedom in their movements. He reflected on what he knew of his strange sensei, but there was nothing there to warrant him to be under house arrest or something similar. Fugako hadn't said anything, but his lips thinned and he huffed under his breath. "Is there something I should be aware of?" Minato asked them carefully. The Uchihos looked at each other, each of them thoughtful before Cheyenne bent her head a little. Fugako looked at Minato with an unreadable expression before he leant against the chair Cheyenne was sitting in and decided to speak. "It isn't as if it is a secret, you know, but I understand why they wouldn't tell you. Yoshino is an ANBU member, always has been, and for the longest time he headed the assassination squad." Minato nodded at this. It certainly explains some things, like why his sensei always wanted him to have close to perfect awareness of everything around him. Balance, observation, silence and secrecy were needed to be a good assassin, and being one he obviously trained Minato to be one too. It made sense. Though, something didn't add up here. He's still ANBU. "I didn't think ANBU members could take on students unless it is some sort of mission?" he asked thoughtfully. He was sure there were a lot of people watching him, studying him, laying plans concerning him, but he didn't think they'd pull out the captain of the assassination squad just to streamline him into ANBU. Something else was going on there that he didn't know. Akane nodded seriously at him. "That is so, But after one mission, Yoshino asked the Hokage if he could retire from the ANBU. He got into a huge quarrel with the elders of the clan over it too, and it ended with him getting a sort of leave. He's still part of ANBU, but at the same time he isn't. When the Hokage asked him to take on a student, he acknowledged Yoshino's desire to leave, and the elders can't argue it because he is still listed as ANBU on leave. Minato glanced over at Cheyenne, who was one of the elders of the Uchiha clan, with a tilted head and a question in his eyes. Cheyenne gave a small, sad smile mixed with pride. Do you know Yoshino was only 15 when he joined ANBU? He's been there since, that is 8 years in the Shadow Corps, and I think that is enough for anyone. Whatever happened at that last mission broke whatever will he had to remain there. He refused to let us know what happened, and the clan had agreed to let him keep it a secret. Probably because the mission was classified and the Hokage would have his head if he tried to pry classified information from his ANBU. She laughed a little, lightening the suddenly uncomfortable mood in the room. Yoshino would let the Hokage know if they did. He never lets a chance go by to rile them up, especially since it was something he specifically didn't want to talk about. She laughed, and even Fugako tilted his lips into a smirk. Cheyenne chuckled at her daughter's correct assumptions of her brother's character. Minato was thinking on something else entirely. If it was like this, he still didn't understand why Yoshino should have some sort of house arrest placed on him. Cheyenne simply smiled a little at the narrowed blue eyes and too serious expression on the 8-year-old. The elders weren't happy at all with Yoshino, she said, and even if she was one of them, she didn't talk as if she was one of them at that moment. She sounded resentful, actually. Fugaku shrugged, and his expression was one of annoyance. Minato guessed he was having his own problems with the clan elders as the clan heir. He had never envied the friends he had who had to deal with that sort of thing. They placed some restrictions on him, which makes the missions with you the only times he can freely leave without causing an uproar, she explained. Minato raised an eyebrow at that. He shouldn't be happy for it, but it hopefully meant they would be taking a lot of missions outside of the village. So that's how it is, he muttered and bit his lower lip musingly. It was most enlightening. It was interesting that even after that, Yoshino still was loyal to the clan as a whole. He supposed it was like with someone angry at individuals in the village, but still loyal to the village. No one got along with everyone after all. Though when ninja fell out with their leaders, they usually either mysteriously dropped dead, or turned traitors to their villages. Would the clan leaders consider Yoshino a traitor in the end? Minato didn't know the answer to that. I have to go. I need to see my friends before I leave and let them know I'm not going to be home the next week, he said hastily, and nodded towards the remaining Uchiha in the room. He waved at the baby, and left them abruptly. He had things to do after all. He wanted to ask someone about Yoshino, and tried to figure out what happened on that mission to make him back out of ANBU when knowing it would cause troubles for him with the clan elders. Yoshino wasn't stupid, and he usually acted as volatile as a fat house cat. Minato could count on one hand the times he had seen his eyes harden like they had at the hospital, and the steely undertone of his voice was just as rare. For him to stir up trouble, to bother to stir up trouble, it had to be significant. He was momentarily drawn from his thoughts when he opened the door to his apartment to find Kushina sitting at the table, sitting Indian style on the chair and glaring daggers at a book. Her hair was a mess, further proof that she'd been pulling on it in frustration. He closed the door with a loud enough click that it made her aware of his entrance. She looked up and a radiant smile transferred her scowl to a welcoming one. "What are you doing here?" Minato asked and untied his forehead protector and weapons pouch to drop them on the kitchen counter. He walked past her and went to boil some water while waiting for her to speak up. Since she didn't immediately burst out with it, he guessed she was either embarrassed, or it was something personal. Or both. "Minato, you're really good at chakra manipulations, right?" she asked timidly. It was so wrong to hear her speak like that, and it made him wonder what this was all about. "Depends on how you view it, but I'm good enough for now," he said diplomatically. He knew he was far above the level of ordinary genin, but he also knew he had a long way to go to do what his sensei wanted him to do. He hadn't even tried to convert the chakra strings into strings of wind elemental chakra. Sure, he had a basic grasp of the theory of how to do it, but as he knew all too well, there was a large gap between theory and practice. "Yeah, right, keep telling yourself that. You are damn good at it, so tell me what I am doing wrong," she said impatiently. Minato raised his eyebrows at that, before pouring hot water in his cup. "You want some?" he asked and got a pointed stare in return. He tried not to sound annoyed when he answered. "I can't say what you are doing wrong unless you tell me what the problem is, Kushina. Why are you reading about chakra manipulations anyway? It isn't something academy students usually bother with." Her eyes narrowed. Good, she got angry, and would tell him what he wanted to know. At least, that was her usual act. Quit acting all superior. "It isn't funny, and I can read whatever I want to." "Yes, but you still haven't told me what's wrong," he agreed pleasingly. He went looking for something to eat, preferably something sweet. He hadn't eaten anything sweet all day, and he really needed some if he was to endure Kushina when she was in one of her pouting moods. "Are you even listening to me?" she asked suspiciously. He turned around with a reassuring grin. "Don't worry, I am listening. I can listen to you and search for my treats at the same time." Kushina stared at him, for a long moment before she shook her head slowly. Carol hid your pocky earlier today. He said it isn't healthy to be eating it all the time, but forgot you eat dango for lunch. Suddenly she had a sly smile as Minato paled at the idea of his sweets being hidden. Can it be that you haven't had your usual sugary kick and that's what making you so grouchy? Geez, you really are addicted, aren't you? Honestly. But if it gets you more cooperative, they are beneath the towels in the bathroom. Minato went to get them without another word. He would have words with the brat about hiding his sweets when he came back. He'd been close to emptying the sugar jar in his tea and transform it into syrup, which didn't sound too bad until he could sit down with the sweets. Then he remembered that he didn't particularly care for sweetened tea after all. So why are you worried about the chakra manipulations anyway? He asked and tilted his head towards the book she'd been reading. Kushina grumpily closed it and handed it back to him. It was his anyway. The other girls all have really good chakra control, and mine is just regular. I wanted to impress them, I guess. Now, that was an honest response, and one he hadn't expected. Perhaps she was maturing a little despite her young age. Minato hummed and wondered what he was going to tell her. He was familiar with the problems of chakra control. It had been his pet peeve for the longest time, until inhabiting another body, that is. It wasn't exactly an advice he could give her either. Oh, go get yourself a demon. Have an insane member of the Uchiha clan try to control said demon with his creepy eyes and maybe said demon will do whatever and throw you into the body of a relative. No, that wasn't exactly the way to go. Not everyone can be good at it. If you have a lot of chakra it is more difficult to control, and you have more than most kunoichi. It only means you are better suited for ninjutsu than some of the more traditional kunoichi fighting styles. In that regard you are more like a shinobi than a kunoichi, he said slowly, proving that he to some extent was still very, very dense. Her eyes flashed for a moment, before she huffed. It was a compliment, after all. Sort of. It was true even if it wasn't, and she liked it that way. Minato rested his head again a popped-up hand while thinking it over. If you want to be better at it, you could do the leaf balance exercise every morning or afternoon. It should help you with your control, and the awareness of your chakra. It was what he'd had to do for 2.5 years with Jiraiya. If it helped him, it should help Kushina too, considering her chakra control was better than his had been. He felt a bit bitter about that. Having a seal constantly messing with your chakra, either drawing on it or releasing more into your system, isn't very helpful in regards to controlling it. Oh, well, he'd make up for it now. Do you think that's going to help? She asked doubtful. Yeah, I usually do some sort of chakra control every morning before I meet up with Yoshino's sensei. He's totally fixed on it, and won't let me slip even the slightest. That and he is nagging me about having a small chakra pool, so I have to enlarge it somehow. She blinked and looked surprised for a moment. Really? I didn't know you trained before your training. That sounded wrong, but when do you get up? You eat breakfast with us almost every morning, so when do you have time to train? Minato smiled cryptically. That is a mystery for another day, my friend, but if that was all you wanted to ask me, I have to get some sleep. Yoshino-sensei is taking me on my first C-ranked mission tomorrow and I want it to be fully rested before we leave. Her eyes went wide, just like he knew they would. She was gaping, and pointed accusingly at him. It did remind him of a goldfish on dry land. C-ranked? That is so unfair. I bet it is because you are everyone's little perfect genius, right? If it was anyone else they wouldn't let them. You haven't been a genin for even a year yet. How did you do that? Minato smiled and laughed as he knew his answer would confuse her and annoy her. I studied butterflies. Lots and lots of butterflies. The feeling of wind sweeping against his face and the wild freedom of simply racing through the trees was wonderful. It didn't matter that the night was damp and the moon's light obscured by the canopy. It was exhilarating. Minato wanted to laugh loud and his heart raced as he deftly followed the dark shape of Yoshino step for step. He could barely make him out, and he was so silent Minato wouldn't have known he was there if he wasn't seeing him. Their chakra was suppressed. Yoshino had done it as soon as they exited the village gates, and Minato followed. It wasn't something one would usually do for a simple C-ranked mission, but he supposed Yoshino acted on habits. His grin broadened when he saw Yoshino glance back at him with a smile on his lips. He couldn't see the smile, but he knew it was there. It was impossible not to smile, when the chase in the treetops made them feel so much alive. Minato wondered how he could have lived without this for the past years, without the thrill of a mission and the adrenaline building on anticipation. The feeling of pure joy made him leap up beside Yoshino and grin mischievously as he sped off between the branches. The Uchiha made a sound that could be a chuckle, and Minato could practically feel him close to distance again before he suddenly was in front of him, and the blonde swore he saw Yoshino wink at him. They continued their game of cat and mouse throughout the night, hunting each other and overtaking each other with every step. It wasn't a very energy-efficient way of travel, but they did cover a great distance, and Minato was surprised to note that his sensei didn't reach for a single cigarette as they leapt from tree to tree. Yoshino proved he could be playful when he wanted to be, when he sometimes would push or pull at Minato to make him lose balance or concentration. Minato pushed back, or tried to, since he had to actually get close enough to Yoshino to reach him, and when he did succeed, Yoshino laughed. It wasn't the dry, sort of mirthful laugh with an undertone of bitter irony that he was used to, but pure joyous laughter. It was weird to see Yoshino enjoying himself. When dawn broke, they landed in a small clearing and Yoshino laughed softly, his eyes dancing with happiness and not the bland mirth Minato had gotten used to. It made him look younger, and more there, as opposite to the distance he kept when staring at the faraway sky. Minato laughed too, but his laughter was broken slightly by his heavier breathing. "We should do that more often, don't you think, Minato?" he asked and smiled brightly at his young charge. Minato stared at him for a moment, and nodded with a small smile. He breathed out one more time before he straightened and tilted his head at his teacher. "Hey, sensei, what are we doing out here?" he asked tentatively. He hadn't asked Yoshino about the mission yet, and he hadn't offered up anything either. They had left at dawn 2 days ago, and the first thing Yoshino had done was to turn his day upside down. They traveled at night hidden by the darkness and the canopy of trees, but he gave no explanation as to why. At the moment, as far as Minato was able to tell, they were somewhere along the border of Fire Country and Sea Country. Sea Country was a smaller country, and dealt mostly with shipping and trade. They had no hidden village, and as far as Minato knew, they didn't have any kind of treaty with fire either. During the war they had kept inconspicuously quiet and calm. They had continued their trading routes as if nothing was going on, and even if it was a secret war it did affect the countries at large. But not Sea. Sea remained untouched, tucked safely between the coast of Fire Country and the coast of River Country. From there they sent their ships east to Wind Country, or northwest to the many small nations littering the coast before it reached Water Country. What they were doing in this backwater nation was beyond Minato. Yoshino focused at him and chuckled at his peeved expression. "I know where we are, if you were wondering," he ensured, but Minato wasn't worried about that. Yoshino's spacing out hadn't happened since they had left the village, and even if he was prone to walk without thinking inside the village walls, he doubted his sensei would do that on a mission. Considering his previous post, Minato wasn't sure if it was possible for him to space out on a mission. He seemed to have snapped back in full mission modus as soon as they left the gate, suppressing chakra and traveling only at night. That was something ANBU would do, not something normal ninja on a normal mission would. It was considered too tedious by most. Their little game that night had been the exception. It had been surprisingly fun, I am sure, he said dryly, and Yoshino smirked at the deadpan answer. Minato had the distinct feeling Yoshino was enjoying himself immensely. He was nearly bouncing, as incredible as that sounded. "What I meant was to ask you what our mission is," Minato corrected, and got that bad feeling again when Yoshino turned serious in the blink of an eye. He felt as if he was watching the ANBU captain and not his sensei. It didn't help that he could see the shimmering red beneath the black in his eyes. "I guess I should fill you in." "I haven't told you yet, have I?" Minato resisted, rolling his eyes at the obviously rhetorical question. Yoshino motioned for him to follow as they started to walk normally at the forest floor. "I don't need to tell you this, since you know it, but during a war a lot of people are made homeless. Families are torn apart, mothers and fathers killed, children lost, refugees wandering aimlessly in search of some shelter and a new home. Whole nations went under during the last war. It made thousands of people lose their home, some lost the earth they'd been living off, some had their homes burned. It doesn't really matter how, the important thing is that it happened." Minato wondered where his sensei was going with this, but he kept silent and listened. If it was one thing he had learned with Yoshino, it was that there was always more to what he tried to teach him than the obvious. The bastard liked mind games. These people don't have anyone to protect them. They don't have a home, often not a country to belong to, and no money. They are, in lack of a better word, free prey. Those who are stronger, those who have no scruples or morals when it comes to earning money, can easily earn money on the people left defenseless by our war. Minato felt a chill go down his spine. He had heard stories, of course, but he had never actually believed them to be true. He had heard from the elder ninja in his past life of missions concerning certain aspects of despicable trade. Human trade. Slaves. He had thought there was something to it, but he hadn't thought it was something he would ever be entangled in, and certainly not something which happened on Fire Country's borders. He glanced at his sensei and wondered what they were supposed to do. The Hokage wondered why C's been keeping so quiet and docile during these years, and ANBU investigated it. They've been keeping track of C's slave shipments. Most of them head northwards, towards water. We aren't sure why or what the Mizukage is planning with so many slaves, but something is going on there all right. Anyway, that is ANBU's problem, not ours. We are simply doing a sweeping. Sweeping? Minato questioned, not sure if he got the meaning of that. Yoshino shrugged, and Minato noted that sometime during his briefing he pulled out a kunai and was absent-mindedly swirling it on a finger. He'd never seen Yoshino toy with anything, not even the cigarettes, and to see him play with a kunai while talking about sweeping was unsettling. Yoshino hummed, and his eyes swiped over the area around them, flashing red every now and then in response to whatever thoughts he had. Yeah, sweeping it is a term used when you head in to kill everyone in a certain area, organization, or family. Minato's eyes widened and he cursed in his mind. He had known he wouldn't like whatever it was Yoshino had planned for him, and this was proving it. While he found the whole slave trade despicable, he still didn't want to cold-heartedly kill a whole bunch of people just like that. Yoshino eyed him for a moment, before he resolutely turned his eyes forwards. I was older than you are now when I was roped in for my first assassinations, he admitted silently. His voice was so soft Minato wouldn't have made it out if he wasn't trained to pick up low sounds. He looked up at Yoshino, but his face was blank and void of any kind of emotion, even the lazy mirth he used to hide behind. I was 10, and had awakened my Sharingan only a month prior. According to my clan and whoever decides those things that were enough to get me promoted at the Chunin exams, so yeah, a fresh Chunin picked to assassinate a family of 7. They were part of the daimyo's court, and with the power struggles going on between 2 of the old daimyo's sons at the time, people were killed left and right. It is ironic that Konoha ninja did most of those assassinations, but then again, the Hokage always likes to keep track of what goes on there. Minato didn't say anything but waited for Yoshino to continue. The story wasn't over, and it was interesting to learn something about his sensei. Can you do it, Minato? Can you kill your heart for your village? Because it is your duty as a ninja of Konoha to carry out the missions we get flawlessly, and this is our mission. Do you think when the time is there, that you can end a human life knowingly, willingly and efficiently? Minato didn't answer at first. It wasn't as if he hadn't killed before, in his other life. No, he had killed plenty of people, but that was an open battle. They had a fair chance of defending themselves, but he was a shinobi, and they didn't fight with honor. They fought with whatever suited them best at the moment, and if assassination was the easiest way to succeed, then assassination it was. It had to be, or he would never be able to rise in the ranks as he had planned. He suddenly remembered what Yoshino had asked him the day they first met, when he accepted him as a student. What is your reason, Minato, to want to walk this path in life? To want to willingly soak your hands in blood, sell your soul for your village and kill your heart for your sanity? Sell your soul for the village and kill your heart for your sanity. If he wanted to serve his village in this time, he'd have to swallow whatever regret and guilt he'd feel, he'd have to do things he couldn't justify by idealistic views, he'd have to sell his soul, and kill his heart. Hard icy blue eyes met blood red, and he started, because it was the first time he saw the awakened Sharingan in the eyes of Yoshino. 3 tomos in each eye, slowly spinning and glowing in the bleak morning light. Minato met his eyes dead on, and nodded. He'd do it, because sooner or later he'd have to, and sooner or later ideals weren't enough, and this was a time where he didn't have a choice. For the sake of the future, he had to quell his misgivings and accept the path of twilight every ninja walked. I will. It wasn't a question, or a sentence, it was a statement. He would, and God's help him he would. He fisted his hands for a second, before he was aware of doing it and loosened them. He looked up at his sensei again, but the shining red of his eyes were once again darkened to an onyx black. He wondered briefly why his sensei had activated the bloodline while waiting for his answer, but he wasn't sure he wanted to know. He was pretty sure he'd never understand the enigmatic Uchiha. What happened? He asked after a while. Yoshino glanced questioningly at him. The first time you assassinated someone, what happened? Minato asked again, but didn't expect an answer. He was astonished when Yoshino smiled wryly and answered. I did it, of course. It was AB, ranked missions since it was assassination, but it wasn't really difficult or dangerous. They were only one of many families at the court, and for some reason targeted in the power struggle. They lived in a small mansion, and it was ridiculously easy to sneak past the guards and access the targets. I have a feeling the guards might have been bribed, but I never cared to find out anyway. It went smoothly until I reached the youngest children. One was only a baby, and I couldn't help but stop and wonder what the hell I was doing. Yoshino grimaced and shook his head at some other thought he had. Minato watched him and wondered what he was thinking, but it was as usual impossible to tell. That was the day I killed my heart, as they say. I slit their throats, and walked out of there as if it was the most natural thing in the world. There wasn't anything more to it. It was my mission, my duty to the village, and the village depended on me to fulfill it. If I couldn't even to that, what kind of ninja would I be? Minato didn't say anything, and they continued their walk in silence. It was noon before they stopped and found a place to rest and wait for the dusk. The dense forest of Fire Country had given way to a lusher, open forest with smaller trees and clearly defined paths. They weren't worried about anyone seeing them, but they still decided for one to keep watch while the other rested. Minato got the second watch, and regarded Yoshino as he slept. The Uchiha lay on the side, one arm under his head and under the other hand was a kunai. His breathing was even, but Minato could tell from where he sat that it wasn't a deep slumber. It was more like a light doze where most of the senses were still alert. His theory was proven when he went to wake his teacher. Yoshino's eyes were open when Minato got within 5 feet of him, and he had a feeling he had been aware of his movements as soon as he rose. He did however note that Yoshino reflexively gripped the kunai tightly and stiffened before he was entirely coherent again. Any trace of sleep was gone when he sat up and let his eyes trail the sky to get an approximated time. Sensei, may I ask something? Minato asked, and Yoshino nodded absent-mindedly. You said this slave trade really is the ANBU's problem, so why are we sent to assassinate the traitors? he asked, and Yoshino blinked before he hummed and rubbed the back of his neck to loosen the stiffness in his shoulders. Sea country is a neutral country, and as such it doesn't matter to fire where they get their money from, officially, that is. The daimyo and the Hokage are perfectly fine with ignoring them as long as they keep that particular trade outside of the fire country's borders. We do need the supplies they bring us on their ships after all, so it wouldn't do to have the country bankrupt. For once Minato realized why he liked Yoshino so much. He didn't just explain what they were doing, but why and the reasons behind it. There were so many more sides to some missions than the black and white he'd been used to. Guarding princesses and fighting a war seemed rather two-dimensional compared to missions where politics and economy were involved. Well, there was money involved in every mission, but not necessary on a large scale like this. He understood why the Hokage pretended Sea Country was as goody two-shoed as they presented themselves to be, but it still didn't explain what they were doing there. Sea Country, like every other country, gets their money from taxes, so they don't control their different traders too much. They are aware of the ban Fire Country has on slave trade within its borders, so they usually discourage their people to try something like that there, since the Hokage and the Fire Daimyo would frown upon it if they knowingly broke their law. They aren't stupid enough to antagonize the closest military power to them, and they are quite aware that Fire Country could annex them without any trouble if they annoy our daimyo or Hokage too much. That is their main reason to keep their exotic trade from Fire Country. The other is the scandal it would bring them. Officially, Sea Country looks down on slave trade and is firmly against it because all human lives are valuable and none should be considered goods.